The uses currently housed in the structure require 20 parking spaces, and the retail and office space, which is to accompany the refueling station, requires 7 spaces. The zoning ordinance states that all off-street parking areas shall be graded and paved to town specification if more than 10 spaces are used regularly, at least 5 days per week for more than 120 consecutive days a year. The paved parking currently in place at 136 Fayetteville Street cannot accommodate 27 parking spaces. The recommendation is to hold the evidentiary hearing.
Paul, this is one of those public hearings that needs to have sworn witnesses.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have a copy of the oath, if I might. Alice, do you have a copy?
No, I'll go in my office and get one.
While we're waiting for Alice to come back with the oath, would it be inappropriate, Paul Messick, for us to talk about, since we're still in public hearing mode, the board wants to talk about the public expression sign-ups for tonight. So we'll talk about that when we come back out of the public hearing. There are 2 people who were signed up, Matthew McCrory and Mohammed Savadi. If those 2 persons will rise, and if there's anyone else who wishes to speak on behalf of this matter, if you will rise also. You'll raise your right hand and repeat after me. Or affirm that the evidence that I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you. Matthew McCrory, you're first on the list.
I just want to say I'm basically here, I think, to answer any questions that you guys have for the evidentiary hearing. But this is going to be pretty much my business and my father's business, who couldn't make it today. But we do plan on opening and operating out of that location.
Can you tell us a little bit about the broader business plan beyond propane?
Yeah, so actually that's somewhat of a small part of it. We have a location currently in Wilmington, North Carolina, actually Castle Hayne, North Carolina, and I wanted to bring it up here primarily to sell parts and materials to contractors, but having a dispensing station was and has been a big part of our location in Castle Hayne, so we also wanted that as kind of residual revenue and things like that. But that is more or less the broader business plan, is to go in and try to sell parts to contractors for gas equipment, propane equipment, natural gas, to mostly residential type of contractors.
It's noted in our notes from the planning department that there are not a sufficient number of parking spaces to satisfy the ordinance. Would you speak to that, please?
Yes, I would, and I did produce a little bit of just basic history for our current location, and I kind of wanted to speak to that a little bit. So our current operation's been in place for about 60 years, and I ran some figures based on daily sales for the past 2 months at our current location, and the average customer count for walk-ins was 4.75 customers a day for walk-in. It's just not a huge walk-in type of business, with the high being about 13 and the low being 1, and that's for a 9-hour workday. And so my thinking was the code ordinance actually requires 7 spaces based on the amount of square footage we have or we're requesting to use at this location, but I don't know if it's necessary that we need all those spaces. If you just kind of take the average divided by a 9-hour workday, we really only have about 1 customer every 1.8 hours, and that's at an established location. So I don't know if it's not something you kind of drive by and stop in. It's just not that kind of business. It's somebody that's actually already in the business that needs parts or materials that's going to come by. So I don't know that 7 spaces is in fact necessary for our operation.
How many staff do you plan to have?
I actually only plan to staff it mainly myself to start with. Yeah, so it's a kind of a small operation, and we're hoping to move forward, but I don't see any plans for bigger staff right away.
So one
Basically me and maybe an assistant, yeah, to be there to hold on the fort.
Other questions by the board?
I have one just regarding, I know when we had that last rainstorm, some water was quite a bit back up in that corner on that retail area. Have you done anything regarding that?
I cannot speak to that per se.
No, I mean the water kind of crested
Yeah.
a little bit, but then it went back in, back down.
Did it go in the building?
It did not. No.
Further questions? Mohammed Sabati?
Yes, ma'am. I'm the owner of the property, and I'm just here to answer any questions that you guys might have. And in regard to the parking spaces, the portion of the building that we use, myself and my partners, we have an online business that we sell stock. And yet, even though we've got 4,000 or 5,000 square feet under our disposal, but we really just have me and my 2 partners. So 3 spaces is all we've ever used for the last so many years that we've been in that building. So even though the formula dictates that we need more parking spaces, but between us and that, we're not going to have 5, 6 cars there at any given time to run both businesses. That's just kind of why.
Further questions?
Just one more, I guess. I rode back through there today, and these parking spaces that are, it says existing parking spots, didn't look too much like any parking spots to me. We're back on the building.
Did you drive to the back of the building?
Yes, sir.
That whole area is just have asphalt on it from the past. We didn't do
It's
anything.
got, and concrete.
And
Yeah, I saw
concrete,
that.
And so we didn't do anything to it. So all of that could be parking spaces for whoever wants. Every now and again, we have a truck that comes through there to pick up a pallet of a shipment or drop a shipment off, but that's it. We don't really.
Mr. Jones, do we have to have designated parking markings or anything?
Yeah, that would be something we would want to see is striped parking.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, we have so many uses in our ordinance that require a special use permit, which is the highest bar to hurdle.
Yeah.
And when I look at the sketch, it doesn't come close to meeting the requirements of a site plan application. It helps to answer a lot of the questions about whether it does meet or doesn't meet the standards of the ordinance. And the very first thing that this board has to do is determine that the application is complete. You can't really hear it if it's not. And Now, there is a caveat that says the planning director or the zoning administrator can require more or less information than a site plan. And so I think we'll need to determine whether or not that lesser amount of information is what is being requested here. And if not, we'd have to find it incomplete, at least from my understanding.
Yeah, I did want to point out from my understanding on the special use permit for, particularly for a propane dispensing station, it was that it meets current setbacks, and I know that it is not listed on that site plan, but the major setback was that stream, and we found a spot 50 feet from that stream for the dispensing station. The other requirement was that it be less than 1,000 or equal to 1,000 gallons, and the proposed is 500 gallon tank, which is really not much more than you find at a residential home in a rural area, especially. I did find the special use permit to be a little stricter than I guess I'm kind of used to. I'm surprised to even see it. We've put dispensing stations up in a couple of counties down in the southeast and not had to do that. And we would get it inspected by the Department of Agriculture, which is a requirement through the LP Gas Code, to make sure that when the tank is set, it's actually set. I think I included the bollards, and you guys might not have that, but I did submit with my application specifications for bollards so that traffic can't hit the tanks. I included the actual specs of the tank and specs of the propane dispensing cabinet itself. So I tried to include a lot. I know the site plan is perhaps not up to par, but I mainly wanted to get the footages correct for where the tank can and can't go on that.
Anything else?
So, let's see, some swirling questions. I am familiar with the safety of propane, but I wonder if you might say a few words about that for the benefit of the board.
Yeah, do you mean like environmentally, or do you have a particular
Risks.
Yeah, so propane, of course, is a flammable gas, but it is in a contained cylinder, and when properly maintained, I believe it to be a very safe fuel. You can actually, per LP Gas Code, for a dispensing station, it has to be 25 feet from a building, which we would meet. And for residential, it only has to be 10 feet from a residential building. And so I think that speaks a little bit to the safety of it as well. You can also have propane tanks right up against residential buildings, as I'm sure you guys have seen, for smaller quantities, up to 120 gallons. And it is a very commonly used fuel throughout in the entire country. For the environmental aspect of it, I did email the head of Department of Agriculture that heads up all the LP gas, and that's Richard Fredenberg, and he emailed me for the environmental aspects of propane, and I just kind of wanted to read that because I emailed him in, actually with this case in mind, with regards to the creek, essentially, that's back there. And he said, if I may read, he said, the LP Gas Code has no requirements for separation of dispensers or point of transfer from a stream, creek, river, bay, etc. The only restriction is that the tank be anchored if it's in a high water level. And that interpretation is for 100-year flood level. EPA has determined that propane, even with the odorant, is not a water contaminant. Therefore, it has no EPA or code separation requirement for propane tanks from water bodies, wells, or other water resources, which I think is the most important part to bring up with regards to kind of the safety of propane.
So I gather that it's a liquid, and when released from pressure, it very rapidly becomes gas. Not explosively, but rapidly.
Yes, sir, that's correct. Yes, it very quickly, I think 270 times volume when it's exposed to atmosphere. But it does not kind of seep into the ground like gasoline or diesel.
And it needs to be mixed with air in order to burn.
That's correct. I believe the specific ratio is 2% air to 9.5%
So it's not
air.
really explosive. It tends to burn rather than exploding.
That is correct. Yes, sir. Yes, burning, it is more of a burn hazard than an explosive hazard. I've kind of been in this industry my whole life. I have not, thankfully, ever had an explosive hazard.
I'm interested with this proposal because I like to see existing buildings get utilized, reused, especially in our downtown area, in proximity to it. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, if you would elaborate on your application as regards to the question of existing parking versus additional. How will that come about versus the striping or what have you?
So, I mean, again, it's Mohammed's building, but striping of what's there is not out of the question.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. The park will have 1.8 acres, so there's a good portion of it that we can clear in the future and turn it into parking spaces. It's just that we have put so much money into the building just to get it up to where we could use it at, that we're honestly, our cash flow is just depleted. And so what we'll do is that, once the renovation is done, then we will try to redirect some of the funds that we have toward the parking and towards making it, definitely better for us as well. Having said that, paving it is very costly, and we would rather go back with, crush and run or any form of, stone like that to make it usable, user-friendly, rather than pavement. But all the spaces that are up against the wall, I don't know if you've driven to the back, but all the space up against the wall where there's asphalt and concrete, we can definitely, once the construction is done, we can clean it all up, and we can mark it and have the space available. We're planning on putting lights in the back, and we're planning on doing all that. So to us, this building means a lot, and we want to make sure that it's done right. It's our home.
Yeah, I wanted to speak on the paving, I guess, versus the town requirement for paving standards. I think that's kind of a big hurdle. Like Mohammed said, there's a lot of room back there. And a lot of it is already paved, and most of where I kind of have planned out to have parking spots, that's already paved for the most part. So I think just getting to whatever the town standards are, I'm not even sure what they are, is perhaps the hurdle. But the space is there. All this necessary space, I think, is there.
So we're complete with our questions. Is there a motion to go out of public hearing? So moved. Moved by Bette Wilson Foley. Seconded by Michael Fiocco. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next matter on our agenda is citizens matters. We do, as I had alluded to, have a number of people signed up to speak at the meeting this evening, and the board has in the past taken the position that even though a matter might be on the agenda, that we still regard it very important that we hear from the public. So what is the feeling of the board tonight? There are 6 people signed up for speaking on a matter which is on the agenda, the Powell Place apartment, and there's 1 person signed up for another matter. What is the pleasure of the board? Pamela Baldwin says let them speak. Great. Then we shall proceed with hearing public expression speaker number 1, Ron Hatley, which will come to the podium, and we are going to very strictly keep the time tonight. 3 minutes.
My name is Ron Hadley. I reside at 24 Roy Hadley Road. And I'd like to thank the board today for the opportunity to speak with you. I wish to express concern about the expansion permit as allowed by the United States Department of Interior and the commitments and mitigation strategies included in the environmental impact statement titled Proposed Wastewater Treatment Plant and Discharges into the Robeson Creek and the Hall River is not being met. I was fortunate over the past to attend the NEST meetings that the mayor had set up. These meetings were regarding numerous aspects of the elements that the new development would bring. The members were experts in varied fields on housing, agriculture, environmental impact, and landscaping, to name just a few. The members spent hundreds of hours discussing, researching what plans, what actions, and what safeguards should be put in place for the betterment of all for the massive development that's coming to our area. I fear those recommendations may have fell on deaf ears. We all witnessed this month the effects of the massive amounts of rainfall during a very short period of time. The North Carolina Water Resources and Environmental Quality has advised the mayor and the town of Pittsboro, as well as the attorney for the town of Pittsboro, that the Chatham Park development will incur significant impacts to the environment, and all have agreed that harm to the environment will be minimized. But, however, I fear that may not be the case. A level of 6% impervious to development. 6%, that's only 6%. At a minimum, we must maintain a 200-foot buffer on the perennial streams, 100-foot along the intermittent streams, and on the streams draining to the Hall River, a minimum of 300 feet along the buffer of the Hall. Further, it stipulates the developer must provide controls to maintain the hydrological condition of each site prior to any change in the landscape. This is as outlined by the United States Department of the Interior. Again, I fear this may not be the case. And the Fish and Wildlife Service has given charge to the town of Pittsboro to planning for spills and accidents, contingency planning, compliance monitoring, consideration for effluent concentrations and a maximum of effluent flow into the Hall River, and of course the water quality and species research. As elected officials, each of you swore an oath to be stewards for our population, for the environment, and for all of our natural resources. Each of you is charged to protect that which cannot protect itself.
Excuse me, Ron.
Jim?
Your 3 minutes is up. If you want to give written comments to our board clerk, that would be glad to do that.
Okay. I'd like to thank you very much.
Thank you. The
only other thing I was going to say was generations yet to come and to be good stewards. I missed it by a few moments.
Thank you. Next speaker is John Ford.
Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. My name is John Ford, and I've lived in Powell Place for close to 2 years. So there are 2 points that I wanted to touch upon tonight. My first point is in regard to the MUPD. And what I find most interesting about this current situation that we're in, and how the MUPD is held as sacrosanct. The Powell Place MUPD was approved more than a decade ago. And my understanding is that because the site plan for this apartment complex falls within the stipulations of what the MUPD allows, there is a legal obligation to approve it. Please realize the double standard. If there is a requirement to adhere to the MUPD, then I would appreciate it if the town would respect that Millbrook Drive is designated as a Type D road in the original MUPD. The Type D road is a 2-lane road without designated parking spaces on it. If the MUPD must be followed, then what gives the developer the right to widen Millbrook, making it vary from the original MUPD with its Type D designation? The second point I want to make is that the public safety aspect of the road, which I know you all have heard. Shortly within our first week of moving into Powell Place, the problem of the congestion on Millbrook Drive was evident. In those 2 years, there have been instances during egress and ingress where deadlock has occurred, cars in the opposite direction. On some stretches of the road, you'll encounter cars and just stop. There's no place for them to go from left or right to make way for either of them to pass. So there's this coordinated dance of cars where they have to wait for them to back up to make room to go. This takes time, and for me it's an annoyance. What is an annoyance for me could be life or death for somebody. If somebody has a stroke or a heart attack where literally seconds matter, these kinds of situations can be impactful, deadly even. So the last thing that we need is more traffic on this under-designed road. So as a resident of this town, I would like to think that the board would put public safety above everything. So I'm asking you tonight to please do that. Thanks.
Bonnie Thompson is our next speaker.
Hello again. I want to address the planning staff's recent recommendation. Two of them. One is a safety valve to get out of the Powell Place development. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about this idea of putting in a parking lot. The idea of a parking lot right smack behind homes is a terrible and ludicrous idea. And first, I want to ask, how does this serve anyone? We're not going to tell our dear 81-year-old friend who has Parkinson's disease to park 2 blocks away and hobble in on his cane. Are you kidding me? What about in ice or snow or torrential rains or any of these other weather events we've had? It just doesn't make sense. Secondly, to allow 15-minute parking in front of our homes for deliveries, what about the HVAC guy that's going to be there half a day or a painter who's going to be there all day? These people have to access their trucks back and forth, back and forth. Do we tell them, sorry, you've got to park 2 blocks away and hoof it in? Again, I don't think so. Third, imagine the impact on the ability to sell our home when we explain all of this to a prospective buyer. We wouldn't buy a house where we're told, sorry, you have a garage that is not a 2-car garage, it's a 1.5-car garage. You have no parking behind your home because there's an alley there and other houses. So if you buy our home, you're going to have to park in this parking lot down the hill. That's called devaluing our property. It's just not, I don't see how that can happen. Also, building a parking lot right behind people's homes in that location, and that first house into Millbrook, it's actually, the way it's drawn, it's halfway up into their property, I mean, the side of their property. That's what they're going to be looking at. And that alley, as dangerous as it is, are people supposed to park down there and at 11 o'clock at night walk home, in the dark, in the alley? To me, this feels like a Hail Mary pass, and I really, really hope that you guys do not entertain this as a solution to the problem of Millbrook Drive. Let me just say this. If this is the solution that the town staff has come up with, it's very disappointing. And if the town is going to ban parking in front of our homes, devaluing them, and impacting our enjoyment of them, then there's going to be pushback. I can just tell you that there is going to be pushback on that.
Bonnie, excuse me, but we have...
Is that 3 minutes?
Finished our
Okay.
time. Thank you.
That's it.
You're allowed to submit things in writing. Betterton? Chief Betterton?
Hello, my name is Judy Judy Betterton, and I live on Millbrook Drive. I want to first just thank all of you for the time and attention that you've given to looking into the safety concerns posed by the developer's proposed apartment complex in Powell Place. We've seen the planning staff's memo on the town website proposing taking parking off of the first few blocks of Millbrook and constructing a small parking lot at the end of Concord Row on our HOA's common land. They also propose an exit at the far western end of the neighborhood, but it's important to note that this would do nothing to alleviate the impact of increased traffic from the apartment complex. I'm concerned that this plan asks us to subsidize the developer at the expense of our neighborhood. They know that the street is inadequate for their apartments, and they want to clear Millbrook so they don't have to provide their own direct road. They don't seem to care about the hardships and safety risks they want to place on our residents. This parking lot would be inadequate for the Millbrook Drive families who would have their street parking taken away. They would suffer great hardships daily by having to walk unreasonable distances through a narrow, unsafe alley in all kinds of weather just to reach their homes. The land proposed for a parking lot belongs to the Powell Place community. It's designated as common property and open space intended for our common use and enjoyment. It is covered with beautiful mature woods, and it has a steep drop-off exactly where they propose to put a parking lot. This is a very charming spot right where our houses begin. Mowing down trees for a parking lot there would detract from the beauty and livability of our neighborhood. The planning staff have not presented any details. Who would pay for this lot? Who would build it? Who would maintain it? Our HOA board president told me that he has not been contacted by anyone regarding this plan. We're not sure how it could be approved by the town. I believe that before our board could build a parking lot or sell or give the property to the developer or to the town, all residents would have to be given 30 days written notice of a meeting where a majority would have to vote to approve it. So this is a process that would have to proceed through a number of required steps and would take at least a month before the town could even know if it was possible to put a parking lot onto our community's open space land. We really hope that Powell Place residents won't be forced to subsidize the developers by losing our parking rights and wooded common open space just so they don't have to spend the money to provide adequate infrastructure into and out of their private commercial apartment complex. This plan does not solve any problems, while it does create new ones. Please require the developers to provide a direct access road to their apartment complex or to relocate the complex to their larger site in Powell Place that is already well served by good roads. Either of these two options would not result in imposing further safety threats and hardships onto Powell Place residents. Thank you so much for letting us speak tonight.
Hello, thank you for letting me speak tonight. I too am a resident on Powell Place. I live on Millbrook Road. I just want to say that as leaders of our community, you're charged with protecting the safety of all of your citizens. And that's what I want to speak to tonight, to go along with what you've already heard. But I want to bring up 4 points, 3 that you've already heard extensively. The 4th point is very personal to me. The 4 points I want to talk about are the excessive construction traffic that would be on Millbrook, that even if parking is eliminated, on-street parking, that road, as we all know in this room, is far too small, too narrow for construction vehicles, equipment, materials that to build a 3-story apartment building. That's a tremendous amount of materials coming through this small road. The second point I want to bring up is the emergency exit, which you're well aware of. In case there's only one entrance, as you know, one entrance in and out. What about the emergency vehicles trying to come into our neighborhood? That is a safety issue that really has not been dealt with yet. Also, The parking lot that's been proposed, which would be at the back of an alley, there's no sidewalk, lighting is insufficient. That is not a safe place for children, for elderly people, for anyone to have to walk down. It is at the end of an alley. So that would definitely, as he just spoke to, needs to be looked into further. But the fourth point that I am mainly concerned about is the safety of our students. I'm a teacher in Chatham County, and where I live, I can see the bus stop. There are several buses that come up to the second roundabout twice a day. There are children entering that bus stop area from 3 streets. To the left, up where the townhouses are, you've got students coming across Millbrook, Powell Place Lane, going up to Powell Place Lane, and then to the right on Millbrook. You've got students entering and exiting that bus stop. 3. They are crossing over. Can you imagine when all these construction workers, construction vehicles, materials, all of these things are using that one narrow road? Cars are lined up. I see it every day. I saw it this morning, the first day of school. Multiple cars are lined up. Children are coming off those buses, and it is not safe. I don't know if you're aware, but a child 9 years old can exit a school bus alone. They do not have to have a parent there. Can you imagine a 3rd grader, a 4th grader, 9 and 10-year-old kids exiting that school bus, crossing over these busy roads with all of this construction going on?
Pamela, excuse me.
Cannot imagine.
We are out of time.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Elaine Chiozza.
Thank you for letting me speak. I had asked at your last meeting if Pittsboro had responded to North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality's letter to the town of Pittsboro that basically was saying that the ordinances and construction at Chatham Park did not seem to be in line with the commitments made by Pittsboro in the MPDES permit of 2010, the environmental impact statement, which you're all aware of. So I did not get a response from you, so I did a public records request to the state, and indeed now have the letter that was submitted to the state as a response. I was disappointed to see that the letter is from Chatham Park's attorney rather than from the town of Pittsboro. This is your permit. I had great hope that you would use this pressure from the state as an opportunity to do more to protect water in Chatham Park. This is an opportunity to have larger buffers, to do a much better job with stormwater that otherwise will run polluted into the Haw River. And all of that really means that if these commitments were lived up to that were meant to protect the Haw River, it would mean more forest would remain in Chatham Park. And I believe your constituents and people that live in this area that call Pittsboro their town, that that's exactly what they want. So rather than fighting the state of North Carolina about this, I hope that you will have talks that result in following these commitments that were made by Pittsboro 8 years ago. According to this letter, a meeting was being planned. I suppose I'll do another public records request to find out what happens about that. But I also think it's important that the town of Pittsboro have a little more transparency about all of this. I think the public wants to know what's going on and to be able to have a voice to you, the commissioner. They can't do that unless they know what is actually going on, not just behind the scenes. So I hope a better result will come of this than what this letter to the state is proposing. Thank you.
The last speaker is Bonnie can't read your last name, Bonnie. It's Bonnie Finkel. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to speak. I live at 227 Millbrook Drive, Pittsburgh. This parking lot directly impacts the back of my house. There are two houses on. I do have a diagram that I've been given to from whoever's been planning this, but it's really not clear. It is very dark back there and up the back of Danbury Court. There's no light. There's one light for that whole area. But this is on my understanding is a property that is protected because of water. All the drainage from the back of the Pittsburgh comes down there, goes through the drains behind my house, into this big hole that is directly there, and it looks like a parking lot right on the edge of it, and then it goes into the pond. And to address the no cars in front of your house, does that mean we can't have any people visit us on Hill Drive? Right now there are cars parked in front now and then. Sometimes they're not there. But to say that we can't have any cars in front of our house, it doesn't make any sense to me. I would like my grandchildren to come and visit my daughter and whoever, coming into parking back. They wouldn't be able to park in back because they would have no access to the parking lot. It's already filled with residents. 9, I think, parking lots through here. Originally, they had a parking lot across the street from me. I've been there 10 years. No houses were across the street. But when they started to build the houses, they built a parking lot, right? It wasn't directly across from my house. It was up a little bit. And the developer had the office there, and everybody who was coming in and out of development for houses across the street from me were there. When they were finished with the houses, they left that parking lot there for a certain period of time, and then they dug it up. And we watched them dig it all up, chop all the cement and everything. It was a perfect place. And they built another house. I'm not up yet. I'm 3 minutes up. Yeah, 15 seconds. Well, thank you for allowing me to say anything. I appreciate it. And see what happens. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you. So that is the close of the public expression period. The next on the agenda is updates by the commissioners, mayor, and manager. I will start by simply saying that I've had, over the last several weeks, several discussions with people about Powell Place. I've engaged in discussions about water quality through a conference call with the state officials and another meeting as well about the EIS and water quality issues. I've also cut 2 ribbons for 2 new businesses in town, and that is what I've done the last couple of weeks. Are there other commissioners who have worked with the Economic Development Commission, Main Street, Triangle J Council, on climate change? Any other reports?
One thing we should add was with the Human Relations Committee, because that's part of the county. It's the county committee that I serve on. We have not met, but we're holding a meeting on Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. If anyone is interested in it. Okay, thank you.
I've attended a couple of project meetings on traffic circle improvements, DOT, Duke Power, PSNC, all the utility providers who are going to be relocating their utilities, burying the overhead power lines. So that's getting underway, and we just continue to have progress meetings, and we look forward to breaking ground in February.
There was an annual report from the Chatham County Climate Change Committee. I'm not going to go into that. It's available online at the county's website. But I will echo Mayor Perry that I also have put in a small amount of effort, hoping to find a solution to the inadequate egress/ingress out of Powell Place, and safety concerns that I think we all share on this board. And it's a big challenge. And I'm looking forward to that part of the agenda because I think that we're close to some solutions there. But I know that other members of the board have also invested time and effort, and I want to acknowledge that even if you're not interested in speaking up about it now. This is an effort. This is a project that this board has taken extraordinary efforts on. So, thank you, Commissioners.
Upcoming, let me note that I'm going to be out of town for the Bynum Luritan 60th anniversary, and Brian Grisbeck, our town manager, has very generously offered to sub in that night for the celebration, and we will be doing a resolution in honor of that before I leave to go out of town. But I just thought I'd offer to the board if on 9/11, if people are interested in accompanying Brian. It looks to be a big celebration, and over 80 people are expected to attend. So now, Brian, thank you. We have your update in hand, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And given the discussion that we have this evening, I'll try to be as concise as possible. But there are a couple of things I want to try covering if you want in terms of update, maybe some light input. As you're probably aware, Chief Crutchfield is retiring. He's actually moving on to another pretty significant career opportunity for him and his family as well. His effective retirement date from the town is August 31st. I know that on a personal level, I'll definitely miss seeing Percy on a day-to-day basis. I think he's going to be actually working out of the home for the most part, so he'll be in town. I don't expect him to be a stranger by any stretch of the imagination. I can assure you that. I don't know, Percy, if you've got anything you want to talk about tonight, might be your last chance to do that.
I'll probably get a little emotional, so this is no reflection on this town, this board, or this administration. This has been the hardest decision of my life, or one of the hardest, I should say. I love this town. I love serving it. But I've been a law enforcement officer, an active duty full-time law enforcement officer in Pittsburgh, Chatham County for over 30 years now. And so this was a career opportunity for me to make my family situation better. And I'm going to continue my year. My career as a law enforcement officer, I'll actually be a special agent for the state of North Carolina. So it was an opportunity that it came along. And so, I don't regret a thing so far. This has been a very rewarding career at a time when law enforcement is sometimes dragged through the mud, and sometimes deservedly, sometimes not. I'm very grateful that I've been given the opportunity to serve my community, and I'm very thankful to every one of you. I travel across the state. I go to police chief conferences. I'm on a committee that's with the Criminal Justice Training Standards Committee. I'm on one of the special committees that has 9 police chiefs and 9 sheriffs, and none of them, I shouldn't say none of them, but most of them don't have the support and relationship from their elected body that I have. And our community needs to know that too. And again, everybody here, and more than anything, my staff. The success I've had is because of the staff that I've had working with me. We have some great employees in this town, and they deserve the credit. They helped it, and they've helped me along the way. But as Mr. Grisbeck said, I'm not moving. I actually will be. This is a home-based assignment. I will be traveling across the state. But I'll be working from home, and I'll still be around, and I'll definitely be available. I have the same numbers and contact information, and we'll keep my email account active so you can get hold of me, and I'll still come out and help with special events and stuff. And like I said, it's the most important.
Several of us have given you personal emails and have talked with you personally, but I know that all of us on this board are just delighted for you and your family for this move, and you have large shoes. We will not be able to fill them easily, and we have so enjoyed being with you, and your sense of humor, your sense of dedication to this community are all extremely valuable, so thank you.
I want to thank you for being more than pleased with your office.
And really, I'll never be able to top that. So.
Yeah, thanks. My mistake, I probably should have saved that for last. Sequencing, as I indicated, Captain Roberson is the interim chief effective September 1 until permanent replacement is hired. And I think we're confident in that decision. Chief Crutchfield and I discussed this quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, and I think the good part of this is the transition because Captain Robertson is kind of Percy's detail person. I think that this transition will be smooth, so I'm pretty confident in that. But in terms of the longer game that we need to engage in, I just want to talk to you briefly about the hiring process, and we can get into more detail on this, I believe, at the next meeting. And that would be just a quick overview. Back in 2013, I think I was on the job for approximately a month when the previous Chief Collins, indicated that he'd be retiring. And at that point in time, some of you might recall who were on the board at the time. I engaged the board, helped to assemble a committee. Committee kind of helped define some characteristics. We put out the advertisement. I collected the resumes. I pared it down a little bit, discussed it with the committee. The committee reviewed candidates, provided input. Ultimately, Percy was obviously the choice on that. And I think I can be honest in saying that especially for a new manager at the time, being new in the community, it's a bit like stumbling around in a dark room without knowing where the furniture was at the time. And that for me was a great help to me. And so I definitely want to keep that piece of the process going one way or the other as I would in a position of this magnitude. In 2018, a couple different options. We could use a process similar to 2013, or kind of use a similar process to 13 with maybe the added benefit of using a search firm to help facilitate meetings, facilitate community focus group, and then sort of work through some of the community discussions, kind of get to the same place that we did before. And it's a similar process to what Siler City is going through right now. In fact, I've had some conversations with the town manager in Siler City, and somehow I got, I was going to say roped into, but that's not the word, those are the words I want to use. But I'm privileged to be able to participate in their selection process going up in the middle of this month. So I think that's the cost of maybe soliciting some of Brian's time on that issue. So. But at any rate, I would probably like to recommend that we try to use a search firm, if anything, only to keep us maybe on track, timeline-wise. I think that's one of the real value adds from it. So, again, I want to talk to you a little bit more about that, and certainly if you have any input before the next meeting, please feel free to let me know. And and we can talk a little bit more about it. And I'd certainly welcome any comments you have. Herd Road water main. You recall that there were some residents that live in that area that complained of water quality. Some of it's due to kind of the antiquated water distribution that we have in that area. As you may recall, this is an area north of Pittsboro that's outside of the corporate limits, but one area that we do provide water service to. Staff has been engaged with hydrostructures and come up with some ideas on design. Town engineer will be giving more input and overview on that design at the next meeting. I've had a brief discussion here in this slide as well, and I think the real takeaways from this, I won't go into each and every item, but the real takeaways from this is that we're probably in all likelihood, assuming we have a direction with some of the costs that we'll review at the next meeting, in all likelihood we're looking at some private work that would need to be done. Also, too, we're discovering, and we kind of found this during the Hillsborough Street water main transition, and it's kind of something you do find in older water systems. There were multiple connections to some of the services that maybe weren't necessarily showing up before. So that's kind of what happens when you install new systems in or on top of older systems. So again, Elizabeth will get into that a little bit at the next meeting. Parks plan. We had the privilege of receiving a detailed update on the Parks and Recreation master plan at the last meeting. Paul Horn and consultant. If you could provide, the board could provide written feedback by the next meeting, that would be great. You feel free to provide that either to me or to Paul Horn. We're anticipating that Paul would be addressing the board on the 24th, which would be the meeting after next. And if you can, get those updates to us as early as possible, because it's going to take a little bit of time for formatting. The current version is on the website. You can see the link there under Parks. So, again, if you could provide your feedback to us as soon as you can, that would be great. And then we have some updates on current plans that are in process. The upcoming meetings, the thing I would point out about September 10th, in addition to a few of the other comments that I made earlier in this report, is that we do have the Eagles site plan coming up on September 10th. So I would assume then that there will be some discussion that will take place on that will be re-engaged from the previous discussion. So with that, I would, one other thing that I'd mention as well is I had emailed you, the board, earlier on Chatham Chamber of Commerce Economic Development briefing that is scheduled for Wednesday morning. I believe the registration networking starts at 8:30. You don't have to be there right at 8:30, but I think certainly before 9, and then it's supposed to wrap up by 10:30. I've registered you, so you're all set with that. So hopefully I'll see you then. And with that, I will tap out and open it up for any questions or comments or concerns you have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Brian Griesbeck?
Brian, I got a couple of questions just on the Fern Road water main. That's a private water line serving those homes back there? Is that correct?
It's public sewage line that is serving no water services.
Okay, so it is a public line?
It appears to be a public house.
Okay, because it says there's no public water line currently on Fern Road.
There is none on Fern Road. The service is going through the woods in the back side, but it is not in Fern Road.
So it comes out back through the Trip property back there, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is existing that is serving this area. There is no line on Fernwood.
Is there a master meter or are all the units metered themselves?
That's the meters.
Okay.
They are not necessarily on a right-of-way line or an easement line on these.
Got it. Okay.
So that's what they're trying to.
Thanks.
To confirm, you said Wednesday at 8:30?
Yes. This upcoming Wednesday, 8:30.
Okay, the Agro.
I'm sorry?
You said the Agro.
At the Egg Building, yes.
When I talked to Cindy Poindexter with the Chamber of Commerce on Saturday, she indicated that there were over 300 people who will be attending that breakfast and development update. And it's always been a very interesting event in the past, so we look forward to having whomever can come. All right. We have now our time for old business. Our first matter on the agenda is the Special Assessment District. Tom D'Alessandro is with us this evening, as is Thad Wilson. And we had some discussion about bringing this update to you, given the size of our agenda, but Tom said that he would be very efficient tonight, and would take, and that would take about 15 or 20 minutes. You'll hold your feet to the fire in my time.
Well, I've seen you've been doing that tonight, so I thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak and to bring you up to date. As we mentioned back in June, there are a series of steps that people go through and the state determines as the process for creating a special assessment district. And since we've been giving you different documents at different times, I put this binder together so you would have a place to keep them all together. We have so earlier we gave you the first piece in the process, the first step, which is the petition. And that's where the property owner presents a petition saying they intend or would desire and want your support for creating the tax assessment district on their property. We did that in June. Tonight, under the third tab, we're presenting a draft of the preliminary assessment resolution. So this assessment resolution describes the scope of the project and begins to describe the method for placing the assessment on the property. In the interest of, and the next two sections are blank for future things we'll be presenting. So if you bring your binders back the next time you go out, you'll get a gold star and an insert for these sections. And then beyond that, we have, under the blue tab, all of the summary of the Special Assessment District legislation. And then the last two tabs are examples of special assessment districts from Virginia. Actually, one special assessment district in Virginia, Emery Mill. So we're not going to cover that tonight. That's a reference for between the meetings. But I thought that our focus tonight would be simply on the preliminary assessment resolution. It's what it represents in the process. And I'm going to turn it over to Joe Lucas to walk us through that.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for having us back to continue this discussion. As Tom mentioned, we've talked to you before about the petition, which is the developer's document. It comes to you from the developer making a request, outlining the project, outlining the cost of the project, and outlining what portion of those costs they would like to have assessments paid for. Just to remind you, the purpose of these districts is to allow a landowner to request assessments on the property to pay for projects within the district that benefit the property owners within the district, and all the cost is layered across the district, not on the town. We talked before, I think, a little bit about the administrative costs. They're all built into the assessments, so all of that should be turnkey for the town. As Tom mentioned, the preliminary assessment resolution, I think it's under the green tab, third tab, is a fairly short document, but it's the first action the town would take after receiving the petition from the landowner. And it essentially lays out the facts of what has transpired to date, which references the statute, references the fact that the landowner owns either more than 66% of the assessed value of the property, or a majority of the owners are applying. And in this case, certainly we have a consolidated group of owners of the property, so there's no issue around the basis for which the petition would be made. And so they file the petition, they reference the fact that certain projects have already begun, and then the petition has 5 particular elements. And again, this is the town's document, the resolution. This is the town's document, and the town first, in item 1 at the bottom of the first page, undertakes the projects or agrees to undertake the projects. In item 2, there is an outline of the projects themselves, the public improvements to be funded by the assessments, which include, we've talked about this before, but we'll go back over that, roads and related rights-of-way and other improvements related to roads, water and wastewater infrastructure, water and sewer, construction of parks and trails and biking and associated green space, affordable housing, and then finally costs related to the financing of the improvements and costs related to the establishment of the district. So all of that is built into the assessments that are being requested. So the total estimated cost of the project, which you see is blank here, would ultimately be cited in this initial preliminary resolution, and then after a public hearing would be finalized in a final assessment resolution. Item 4 you see are sort of a preliminary method of determining how the assessments are assessed across the various parcels of land. And then on the last page, item 5 schedules a public hearing. So the way the resolution process works, after the petition you have the resolution process. It's a 3-step process basically. It's the preliminary assessment resolution, the public hearing, and then a final assessment resolution. There's some other pieces that Thad will talk about a little bit, and they have to do with these later documents, which we'll come back and give you more detail on. But there's some other pieces as part of the final assessment resolution as you begin to finalize the plan that deal with, sort of honing in on how we determine the assessments and allocate the assessments to property. So that part, you sort of work through that during this process. But from a timing standpoint, the petition, which may follow and may come as early as this fall, would be the predecessor to this resolution process. So that would be sort of the next step. Happy to answer questions, or I don't know if Thad or Tom have additional comments.
No, I'll say that I did spend a fair amount of time on those Virginia examples, and it was interesting and sometimes confusing. And so I'm really happy to get my notebook. I'll bring it back, get a little star, I'll fill it out. But the thing that I really appreciated about it, the things that I've read in the material in our packet made reference to exhibits. And none of the exhibits were there. I see the exhibits are here, so that's really helpful. The things that you've now put into this document is the affordable housing component. There was just an article today in the Indy talking about Chapel Hill and the struggles it has had with affordable housing, and how their approach has maybe not been as successful as it wanted to be. And I have always kind of thought about the Special Assessment District as an amazing tool to get affordable housing constructed on the ground in Pittsboro. So I'm very happy to see it in here, and I'd like to find ways to make this work, and specifically for that item. It's critical to a healthy community. I don't know that the marketplace will provide for it. So I think these types of tools are a great way to get something on the ground. So looking forward to continuing working on this.
What we would like to do is schedule a time to come back. This has been a very full agenda, and we appreciate having us. We would like to come back, possibly if there's a lighter agenda sometime in September, or maybe have a work session of some kind where we can dive into this a little more detail.
Would this be the kind of thing we'd like to start at 6 o'clock in a work session?
Also, I wanted to talk about perhaps is it necessary to analyze the property before we go forward with doing something like that?
It would have to occur at some point in the process, yes. If there are no questions, we'll work with Brian and the mayor on scheduling a work session. We look forward to coming back. Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next matter is the site plan review for Powell Place Apartments. And Victoria Bailiff will lead us in the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. This is site plan 2018-01. Carolina Commercial Contractors have submitted the site plan for approval. The site is located along Millbrook Drive. The proposal is to construct an apartment complex in the Powell Place MUPD, which will consist of 10 separate apartment buildings as well as a clubhouse. The applicant has proposed a total of 264 units, 81 bedroom, 144 two-bedroom, and 36 three-bedroom units. Due to concerns expressed over traffic issues, the developer provided a traffic impact assessment which concluded that even with the addition of the new apartments, the intersections along Millbrook would maintain their current level of service. The town hired RSNH to review the TIA provided by the developer, and upon review confirmed that the TIA had been performed in accordance with industry standards. The planning board reviewed these plans at their meeting on July 9th. The board found the plans to be satisfactory and recommended approval in a vote 6-0. These plans have been reviewed in accordance with the applicable development ordinances by the appropriate departments, and staff is also recommending approval of the proposed site plan. The Board of Commissioners reviewed these plans at their meeting on July 23rd and voted to table the item for 30 days to allow time to address parking and safety concerns expressed at the meeting, and the resultant suggestions in your memo that you received tonight were because of that.
Comments by the board, questions for Victoria or staff in general, either about the concerns about traffic or a need for a secondary entrance.
There's been a number of neighbors who've expressed interest in building a bridge. I'm wondering if, Mr. Jones, if you can address the people that are here and talk about why that has not been explored. I understand it's expensive. I just thought it would be helpful for.
I think that's the applicant.
Okay.
We asked the applicant.
Okay.
So,
I think it's just be helpful for people to hear why that was not considered.
It was not that.
Yes, good evening. Joe Faulkner with the CE Group. We have studied making that crossing across the creek. That terrain and that location is very steep, and it will disturb the existing wetland and perennial stream that runs through there, and that's a pretty wide bottom in that, and it just did not appear to be feasible as far as in the amount of area that it would disturb and as far as the environmental disturbance that it would create. Now, you can, with enough infrastructure, it could certainly be done, but it would be probably cost prohibitive.
I think it would be interesting. Do you have any idea what a bridge like that would cost?
Oh gosh, the span on it would have to probably be, again, I wasn't quite prepared to speak on this particular issue this evening, but that span would have to be probably 150 to 200 feet. So you're not looking at a span bridge that that would, you're not spanning that. You're actually having to put power in order to make that bridging occur.
So a rough idea that would cost what? I mean, just really rough.
I know just a small core slab bridge that you see on a lot of that are small, maybe 30, 50-foot spans. They're going to run, right now with the way construction costs are, $400,000 to $500,000 on the low side.
For a 30-foot.
That's right. That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
And then multiples of that for the 150-foot.
Correct.
Yeah, I've heard a number, 10 million. I just wondered if that was anywhere
Yes.
close to reality.
Yeah, and again, it's due to the amount of the span that it would require in order to get across. It's also a vertical issue.
Right. Very steep.
It's a very steep drop-off. I would imagine the slopes, there, even getting from the roundabout back into around it, it's almost, you'd almost have to go through the middle of the site there in order to even make that crossing. Then you would have to take that knoll down significantly, that existing knoll that's there by the road. That would have to come down significantly. So, and then that most of that area on the left, as you away from the roadway, is all environmentally sensitive area. So
another direction people have talked about in the community is the Pump House Road, the little road that runs to the Pump House. Would there be a way to, again, I think you run into houses, the backyards of houses, but
you still have to cross the creek there. Other than that, other than through the DOT right-of-way, which has a controlled access road right-of-way, so DOT would not allow that. Because that pump station is actually on the hotel side.
Yeah, it's a difficult spot because it's a very wide wetland.
It's a very wide bottom.
It's almost difficult to walk down. I actually go down there quite a bit. It's a very nice, beautiful area, but it's, I just wondered if there had been a number attached to trying to build a bridge there. I understand it'd be very, very high. That's what I heard.
Patrick Bradshaw.
Madam Mayor, Commissioners, I'm Patrick Bradshaw. I'm the attorney for the applicant and the landowner. The other point I wanted to add to that, and it may be obvious, but because of the configuration, the way that stream runs through there, in addition to just the cost of crossing it and the impacts of crossing it, it would render the rest of the site probably unusable. That site's intended as use for a hotel, which was anticipated in the original master plan. So you have to take into account that in addition to just the extreme cost and the environmental impacts of crossing it, you'd be rendering the rest of that land unusable.
Questions? Additional questions by the board? For the developer?
I don't know if this is for developer or for staff, but I want to step back by saying I'd like to express gratitude for all parties in really making extraordinary efforts. A lot of outside phone calls, a lot of outside meetings, a lot of brainstorming to try and think through some solutions here, and I do appreciate that, especially staff. And Mr. Jones, if you could sketch out the off-street parking idea.
Yeah. So what was drawn on in your packet was just an idea of where we have a known issue of parking on Millbrook and two-way traffic going around those parked vehicles. The staff looked essentially at the neighborhood and found land that would be adjacent to this pinch point that would not have on-street parking as proposed by the developer. So there was essentially 9 or 10 residents homes along that stretch that have a garage. But what staff found is if you have a parking pad, which some homes in Powell Place, they do have a parking pad, actually works better than a garage because people are utilizing the parking pad in the rear and they're satisfying their parking needs in that parking path. When we have a garage that may be insufficient in size for 2 vehicles, at least one of those vehicles, if not both of those vehicles, are being parked elsewhere, either on Millbrook or other side streets. So staff literally had no engineering, no survey work done. It was just finding available land of a size that could handle a 25 to 30 space parking field to satisfy these homes and potentially some guest parking that would be in the area. A number of things came up tonight that would have to be considered: lighting, sidewalk access to this parking. Those are all things that we would want to have the neighborhood and or town or developer, whomever's going to be required to put this parking in. And it is staff's suggestion that we would limit parking on Millbrook in this section as per the MUPD, where Millbrook is designed to have no parking on it. And this was essentially a way to gain parking where there's none now, and to move that parking off Millbrook. Staff's looking at it from a perspective of safety and in terms of adhering to the MUPD that's adopted, and trying to get those cars off of the street where we can't accommodate on-street parking. And then as for the evacuation out the back, that was for a safety concern that we heard from the neighborhood. And there has been issues where folks cannot get from the back of the neighborhood out. How do you solve that issue? And I think we've all looked at those stub streets, and there are a number of those in the area that was planned for and will eventually connect to town streets. The closest one was at the end of Millbrook to some sort of access that is currently on the ground today that runs through the mobile home park at the rear, Easy Road. And staff, I walked out there, and it's a pretty short jog to get onto that street in that mobile home park. There would be a number of things that the town would have to work through to gain this emergency access. We'd have to obtain access easements, rights from the property owners in that mobile home park and adjacent properties. We would most likely have to improve the street that runs through this mobile home park. And then install some sort of gate or bollard system where we do make sure that it is not a cut through for normal everyday traffic, but it really is for emergency evacuation route when and if that's ever needed. And that's really how staff was looking at the issue at hand was what can we do to give you all options moving forward that may or may not be the developer's issue. Maybe they're issues today, even if the apartments weren't here. And I think the evacuation route certainly is something that has presented itself even before the apartments came to our table. And it's really for you all to consider, talk about, and deliberate tonight. And we can try to answer any questions that you have.
Mr. Jones, it's my understanding that the areas around where these stubs are, as they develop, that they will be connected to future communities. So this is a temporary situation that we're in now by only having one exit, in addition to the emergency exit. Eventually, these stubs will
that emergency exit would hopefully be limited in its life, and we would have perfectly good town streets that interconnect and connect out either to Old Graham or to 1551. That's the idea, and I think the neighborhood was set up for that type of interconnection, which is a good thing. Sometimes we don't have as many interconnection points as we do today. We just don't have the adjacent development that we thought we were going to have. 10, 12 years ago.
Well, that was definitely one good thing about the MUPD was that it did have those stub-outs required. I appreciate their existence. I'm going to suggest that maybe we prioritize our conversation, discussion. I don't mean to jump if there's additional questions, of course, I'll go back, but it seems to me that the, as Mr. Jones describes it, the evacuation route connecting to Evie Lynn it feels like the highest priority to me.
I agree. Yes.
And so this would be our project, I suppose. Is that right?
Yes. I think that would be the time for project.
Would there be any request by the town for participation by the developer? Or do you feel the responsibility lies within the town itself?
It always asks the developer to work with us also, but mostly I think it would be a town situation.
It depends on the property of Powell Place that becomes the
There is an intervening landowner between the Lynn Road and Highway, Old Graham Road. And they have granted an easement, from what I understand. Patrick Bradshaw, did you want to speak to that issue? They have granted a limited easement off of Old 87 to the mobile home park.
I think that's correct, Mayor. So as Mr. Jones was saying, those are all issues that would have to be explored by the town and worked through. As far as the developer's participation, as you all know, and I won't beat it to death, but the developer's already offered to do a lot of things that are not required by the town standards for approval of this site plan, such as improvements to Millbrook Drive that are unrelated to approval of the site plan. They're going to cost in excess of $300,000. In response to concerns that were raised about speed on Millbrook Drive, the developer has commissioned a traffic calming study that it's going to give to the town when that's ready from its traffic engineers that you all can act on as you see fit, but that's a several $1,000 item as well. The other thing is, once these apartments are built, you're going to add $30 million to the town's tax base. At your current millage rate, that would be $130,000 in annual ad valorem taxes, which is over 5% of your current year budgeted ad valorem tax rate. So I think this project is already contributing a lot, just in dollars and cents, but also in cooperation to try to work with you all to solve these issues.
Can you point out also, Patrick Bradshaw, where there are adjoining properties that are for sale that may create a greater neighborhood network at some future point in time?
Certainly, Mayor. Edward Holmes, who's one of the property owners, has, since the board's last meeting where these issues were brought up, has talked to the owners of the Cooper Tract, which we don't have an entire picture here, but it's this property here, and 3 of the stub-outs that have been left in Powell Place connect to that tract. There's one here, and there's one further down to the southeast that also connects to the Cooper property. So the owners have said that property is for sale. They're interested in selling it, have it be developed. It is landlocked. Even if it weren't landlocked, the town has jurisdiction to require connectivity as that land is developed. But in this case, in order to develop it, it would have to have connectivity because it currently has no access. So I agree with what others have said that this is a temporary problem.
So is the only connection would be through Powell Place, because that would just create more problems?
Well, there's problems and there's problems. We need connectivity so there are multiple ways in and out, and this is going to solve that problem.
Then it wouldn't really help enough. that got developed and it offered another exit out somewhere else, not just through Calvin.
Well, it would still help. It just depends on whether you think that it raises other issues. And again, it would be required in order for that property to be developed. I mean, the point of requiring stub outs in Powell Place was so that there would be connectivity to the adjacent properties as they were developed.
So where would the stub outs be for that property? Because I'm just thinking, is that just going to add to more traffic on Millbrook if you...
Well, not necessarily, because here,
Okay, I just wanted to
here's
see
one of
what
the stub outs. So that connects to Powell Place line.
Okay.
Right? So that comes here, or out here.
Okay.
Right? And then the others, every time we move them out, we lose some visibility. But there's one here and one here. So, you know, it just depends on how
Well, I
that
was saying,
property
I
is
was
developed.
specifically the Cooper property.
Right. Yeah, well, and all three of these connections are to the Cooper property.
Okay.
Is that 75 acres roughly?
That sounds right to me. I haven't looked at the acreage. So it's the size of the tract.
I actually spoke to Mr. Cooper today, and John and I had mentioned this about some type of easement, temporary road, and for that distance, the cost would probably be considerable amount for the town, and the Coopers were not really overwhelming interest in having a road through there also.
Well, it could impact their flexibility in the ultimate development of that property.
Mm-hmm.
But the big picture is that there will eventually be other exits, other ways of getting out besides Millbrook.
There will be. When that property is developed, there will have to be.
So as soon as the Cooper property is developed, there will be at least one through way, and then possibly a second, probably a second, because there's stubs enough that would make that possible. It's a very large tract, so it seems likely that there would need to be at least two ways in and ways out. But that's in the undetermined future. And do we have any indication as to whether or not the Lynn family is amenable to the short interconnection to Evie Lynn Road from the very end of Millbrook Drive?
I'm not sure at this point. I was not able to connect with them because Dr. Sunday is not able to. But I will be going forward trying to talk to them.
So that road would only be used, fire trucks and whatnot would still come through the regular roads. That would just be if the roads are closed off and there's no other access, they would come that direction. That's my understanding of saying that to the home. Is that correct? Because I know people express concern that if fire trucks had to go on 87 and come up there, but I don't think that's the plan. The plan is they continue to use the roads as long as there's access. Only if the Millbrook was closed and you couldn't get out, it would be a way for people to evacuate if they needed to, or for other.
So, John, does that complete the discussion of the additional access easement in case of emergency, or are there other?
I don't know how we need to proceed, Mayor. I think we need to maybe check all board members and see how we feel about that. I'm strongly in favor of it. I would very much like to see some participation from the property owners of the development. I'd like to see participation even from the HOA. But I also believe that the town bears some responsibility for having allowed to come into play an MUPD that only allows or only requires that one Millbrook one-way in and out. I think that was a mistake. And I think it's incumbent upon us to some extent to amend to deal with the error from 2002.
not allow them to happen again.
Yes, I was just making a note about, are there multiple access easement requirements in our UDO?
Yeah. I know that's something we've talked about.
Very good.
I think this is very important, because this is, like you said, this is a safety issue. If the neighborhood needed to be evacuated, it would be a nightmare right the way it is now. We need to have that access. And I like the idea, I know there's been talk of having one that you could just drive through if needed.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Yeah, so I like that idea too, because if people need to evacuate quickly, you might not have time for someone to come and unlock it. It needs to be something that...
The cable and bollards on Springdale Court didn't seem like the kind of thing that I'd like to see. I'd like to see something that any civilian vehicle could push down and get out if they needed to. I don't know if that's standard practice or...
There are bollards that are collapsing. That given enough force will hold them.
It certainly doesn't help with the traffic issues per se on Millbrook, but it would certainly address the need to have a second emergency exit.
I think there were some statistics that were put forward about the amount of property tax that will come to us as a result of the apartments. There's also a tremendous amount of money that will come to the HOA of Powell Place as a result of this, and I don't recall what that figure is, but it would. I'm simply saying that would hopefully allow the HOA to participate more fully in that plan, in the access plan.
Perhaps put up signage, maybe even monitoring.
Did you have figures on that, Patrick?
I do, Madam Mayor. It's anticipated that these apartments would contribute in excess of $25,000 a year in HOA dues, and I actually think it's somewhat substantially in excess of that. It might be over 30.
Has the issue of on-street parking been an issue that the homeowners association has dealt with, or is it a town-regulated issue?
My understanding, Madam Mayor, is it's a situation that has developed over time, but it is a town street, so the town regulates whether or not there is parking on that street. I will say that the developer are somewhat agnostic as to whether there's parking on the street. They heard concerns about it, and so they offered a solution that's going to cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is to widen the street, widen the right-of-way, and add actual marked parking spaces, which the street was not originally designed to have. Now, that's not a requirement or a prerequisite to approving the site plan for these apartments. That's just something that they've offered to do. Some people don't seem to think that's a great idea. Some people do seem to think it's a great idea. I would also say, Commissioner Foley, to your concerns about traffic on Millbrook, we're proposing, and there may be other solutions. Again, if there are other things that are better or that the community prefers, that's all well and good. But a couple of things that the developer's offering is, one, to make the street wider, but also to offer you some engineered solutions for traffic calming. So you're going to address the width of the street and potentially, if you all decide it's appropriate, how to better control the speed on the street. And I would say that if there's a problem with speed on the street, some of that responsibility lies with the people who are driving on the street.
And we've received a number of emails and letters from residents of Powell Place who, quite frankly, as generous as the offer is to expand Millbrook in that location, have felt that it was not advantageous because it would take down so many trees that would offer a buffer to those people whose lots are directly across. So I don't even know if there's some consensus involved in whether the developer has met with residents of Powell Place and whether that has been balanced. Everything, of course, is a balancing formula, but do you have any feeling or about how that might play out?
Well, the only additional trees that I'm aware of that will be cleared as part of that widening are the existing street trees that go down Millbrook, and we will be replacing those trees back on the widened section on our side. So I'm not sure where the other additional trees, because everything on the site had already been planned to be cleared out along that side, regardless of the widening of the parking. Because it was all cleared as part of the existing right-of-way is now cleared in that frontage.
So is the photo that we're looking at one that shows the clearing already having taken place and those trees having been taken out?
And those trees are on the property. That's correct. Not in the right-of-way. And all of those existing street trees will be replaced.
So would the trees be the same kind that are theirs, that they would eventually become so that you see the road,
Yes.
the visual?
From an aesthetic standpoint, to match what's already there. Correct.
My sense in the community is, I live in Powell Place, my sense is that some people don't want street parking and some people do, so it's one of those tough things to,
The reason this was one of our main solutions is some of the points that were brought out previously with some of the other owners. As far as it'll be along the street, it's well lit, it's safe, it's in front of the units. It's really where they're already parking today. So that was really what gave us the inclination to have that as a solution.
in my experience, the most dangerous part is that big curve, because people going around parked cars will often go in the other lane. So if you're coming in that direction, there's been numerous times where I've almost had a head-on collision. So I do believe personally that by widening that would help make that curve safer.
You'll make that drive, that particular turn, because that'll be on, the parking will be on the inside of the radius, not on the outside. So you're right, it will somewhat enlarge that turning radius for cars coming back toward 501.
And I understand how neighbors feel. It's heartbreaking to think about those trees coming down because they're just getting to a place where they're, healthy and beautiful and big. Hopefully, luckily, it's going to trees do grow quickly. But I do think it's a safety issue in that curve.
Jay Farrell, before our meeting, we were talking about accessibility by fire trucks, and as a long-time volunteer fireman in the community, could you share with the board your thoughts about accessibility by fire equipment?
All these plans have to be approved by the fire department, our chief, and as far as all the plans are in code with the fire department. I can't go in specifics on them because I really don't know them specifically, but everything is in code with the fire department with this. I mean, we're not going to go in and go attack a fire on Danbury, and most of anything we get in, we'd probably attack it from Millbrook, and would be closing traffic. I actually rode over there again today. I looked at the the parking in that back corner. I personally didn't even see how you could get a parking lot in there. I feel for the residents here. I really do. It's I don't.
Not a clear solution.
No, it's not. I did have one question while you was talking about this expansion on that. Is there any possibility that expansion could go around to the retirement center in that curve?
Well, in order to make the expansion happen, we're having to dedicate additional right-of-way along our property frontage. So the only thing there would be the existing frontage along the existing facility not being wide enough to accommodate it.
And Another question I had about parking is that if we didn't allow street parking in front of the apartment complex, would it be possible to add additional parking in the apartment complex itself so people would just walk across the street to their homes? They wouldn't have to.
I mean, that could certainly we were already over parking to ensure that we don't have spillover from ours back to the street. It is all privately maintained. I guess there'd be some concerns from that standpoint.
This is an idea to throw out, because if you had reserved spots in their parking lot that were right across the street from the houses, then people would and you could have a crosswalk for safety, and then, people could just cross the street to get to their house. It would be less disruptive for people. That's an idea.
I like that idea. There was also a space where dumpster service was is in the site plan, actually. I want to call it to the northwest of the site. And it seemed to me that if we were willing, this board was willing to do something on variances, I don't know what the proper word is, but a little bit of flexibility on buffers, that the apartment complex might be able to squeeze in additional parking on that side.
We have squeezed parking in throughout the entire site, really already understanding the concern with the off-street or on-street parking, to ensure that we didn't have spillover. There's a good bit of grade that we're having to make up for where that, I don't know if you know the retention pond that's behind the existing senior facility there. It has a pretty big drop-off that we'll be filling in there, and we also have some cut slopes that we're going up against the bypass. So it has, and you can see where we've got the retaining wall there, so we've really pushed that all back and have really put a lot of parking in. We also tried to give as much buffer back over to Millbrook for landscaping. We set all the elevation down, again, trying to buffer Millbrook as much as possible between grade ends with landscaping. So I'm really not sure if we wanted to add another space where it would go. It's a pretty tight zone.
And I would also say, just looking at the site plan, and I don't think you want to turn this into a parking convention, but people have expressed concern about walking to the space that your staff recommended or offered as an opportunity. I think you'd run into the exact same thing here. If there could be spaces located somewhere on the site, which I'm not sure is practical, I'm not certain that you'd be satisfying folks who are going to have to walk down the street to get to that.
Especially if it'd be worse to have to cross a busy street than it would be to cross a quiet street.
Well, I don't want to go too far from the evacuation dirt road before I ask again if we could get a sense from the board members who haven't spoken up yet about that idea.
You could have 2 full days, yes.
Yeah, the dirt road connection to Eland Road from the end of Millbrook. Are commissioners in favor? Are commissioners skeptical? Are commissioners in support of it?
I think it's a viable solution. I think it is practiced in many developments in similar situations. I would not characterize the connection as dirt. It'll be substantial. It will have to support 75,000-pound vehicle, and that will likely require improvements to the roadway out to 87. So that should it ever be demanded to function properly, that it's able to withstand that type of weight in all weather conditions. In an emergency such as that, I think the collapsible bollards are used throughout development for exactly this type of application. So yeah, I think it is a viable temporary solution.
going to make this comment regarding that. For the fire department, I imagine that we would not use an easement to come to a emergency there. That would be for residents to leave, not for us or the fire department to come in to attack fire, because you just don't know any little bit with that kind of weight could put a vehicle like that in the ditch or in the tree or anything.
Well, I think we're talking about emergencies. We cannot predict what that emergency is. And we have a pinch point in Millbrook. And it may be the fire department has no choice but to come in the second round. So if you're going to do it, you do it for all possible, not all possible, clearly, but any likely. If you have a second point of access, it's not just going one way. It may be demanded upon to function as an ingress as opposed to an egress.
Are you a road engineer?
Yeah, I think
I mean, I think you're a road engineer, so
on the fly. But I'm more interested in hearing from each commissioner whether or not we have the appetite to step up and bear responsibility, some responsibility or all responsibility for making this happen. I've expressed support for that.
well, I certainly would love to see another entrance or exit out of here for sure, because that is a big safety concern.
And do you see that as the town's responsibility? I think is the ancillary part of John's question.
Yeah, I'd like to see the homeowners and the developer help out, but sometimes it's just up to the town to take the initiative and go ahead with it.
And would what is it called? Powell funds? The road bill? Powell bill? Would Powell bill apply to an emergency evacuation road?
Unless it was a public road.
It's not going to be public.
I'd have to, let me expand on that just briefly. It would have to be on the public list of Powell bill eligible roads. It would have to be kind of on that list.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the next count.
That would only provide a small amount of revenue each year. I mean, it wouldn't pay for itself.
That's not in town limits, so that would be another hurdle to designate that as a town limit.
So we need to negotiate with two landowners for rights of way.
Maybe three.
Maybe three.
Of the state, is Highway 87 or through the state road?
They probably want to reaffirm their driveway connection there. The amount of traffic that's potentially can go there. All for emergency evacuation, that's it. The volume would not be to be non-existent. Yeah, it really would. Except for an emergency and lots of things cast to the side in an emergency.
I'm not sure you can lend roads public. I think it's private. So you're going to have to get that right away too.
That's right.
It's private. It's private, but hopefully we can negotiate something with them regarding this.
Possibly.
Right now, it's private.
I think we'd say in the
Stay private.
Stay private, less downturns and so but I think it stays private. We look out negotiations, that we maintain the access. Or however long it needs to be, hopefully it's for a short time, and we have development that can connect, just go away.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we could move on to this other question of parking tax. The thing that strikes me about that is that it is the end of Concord Road is so far from affected if we were to prohibit parking on Millbrook. Also, could you elaborate again, more precise detail about which houses, how you come up with 9 units? Because I'm looking at, let's say, 12.
Yeah, so we can see here on the map, I know it's going to be hard to see, but all the homes that front Millbrook along here don't necessarily have a garage. And the ones that don't have a garage, they have a parking pad that accommodates 2 vehicles. And so we eliminated those residents that have parking pads because they're functioning just well. I can see from this aerial and from on the field that people are actually parking on the parking pad. It's those 9 homes through here that utilize a garage or have an undersized garage that we're trying to accommodate for.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah.
So in situations where people have guests over for dinner, where do they park?
I don't know where they park today. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then there's also on-street parking for Danbury Court, where it intersects Millbrook Drive. At least on the satellite image I'm looking at through Google Maps, I see cars parked
Both sides.
on those east-west thoroughfares. Well, back to Commissioner Foley's question about the corner of Millbrook Drive. I think it was Commissioner Foley who asked whether or not the widening in front of Powell Place Apartments might continue around that corner. It sounds like that's really a question for that landowner between the apartment complex and the age-restricted community.
There is no landowner between the two. They are adjoining.
It goes all the way up to the apartment.
I think the widening goes to that driveway, to their northwest driveway that the dumpster's off of.
That's correct.
That whole spot.
Okay. So it goes around the corner.
Okay.
Go along the whole entire frontage.
Yeah, I think the point was if you wanted to continue widening along the frontage of the Howell Spring Apartments, then there is a separate owner there who would have to participate in that.
Right. And it would really come quite close to the building.
Right.
There's so much traffic in and out of there. Mike, there's only right next door to the apartments. There's a lot of people there. A lot of people use Chatham Transit. There, so I don't think the traffic is an issue there. It's mainly on the curb, at the curb. So it's really just the area that's going to be in front of the parking, the new apartments.
So our second driveway is approximately right there. And so our widening goes right to the end of the property. So where we've got to provide a little taper back into the drive. And then we do the same thing back here. The taper's right up, the widening's right up to the property line.
Well, it looks as though the landowners behind Barton Road and Bramlett Road, that looks to be a tract that I'm seeing a triangular piece at the corner of Bramlett and Barton Road. And I mean, if we're scratching our heads about parking,
Where are you talking about? Where is it?
triangular corner of Bramlett Row and Barton Row.
Where is it?
Right here.
Look, that is
Triangular. See?
Oh, no, I'm thinking about further up.
Yeah, I think that's right. Because that's where you're talking about is close to the bridge. I think it looks
Yeah.
like the bridge.
Yeah.
This appears to be fairly flat.
Okay, now I'm sorry.
What I can see through Google Earth. It's not anywhere near as large as what Mr. Jones found. But it spaces out parking options. And what I'm thinking is that if we're going to go so far as to recommend parking to the south of this problematic area, then why would we also ask for parking to the north problematic area?
Commissioner, I would point out, and it's not my job to throw cold water on these ideas, but there is a perimeter buffer, a required 20-foot perimeter buffer, so that's going to solve some of your trouble.
Yes, sir. And speaking of buffers, I think Commissioner Fiocco, you had mused about the idea of having Danbury Court graded on that backside. Can you elaborate that idea?
Sure,
where you ended up on it?
I've looked at the backside of the units in the alley and the concept of adding maybe 8 or 9 feet of asphalt to that to provide parallel parking for those particular units. And granted, there would be grading, there would be clearing involved, but in the master plan's discussion of buffering, that it made an exception for those buffers that are adjacent to right-of-way. I think the alley qualifies as right-of-way, so I don't think the buffer would be a requirement there. So honestly, what that would do is simply take the on-street parking to the back sides of the units. What it does not do is provide parking further south. And that's where I think, the concept of a remote parking lot within relative walking distance is an idea that's expressed in many high-density multi-family. This is, I won't call this area multi-family a single family, but it is high-density. It is not unusual for guest parking to walk, 100, 200 feet to their destination. I don't think it's a practical use for everyday parking. And I think odds are, I don't know this to be fact, but that MUPD probably requires 2 parking spaces per unit. And I imagine the garages were trying to accomplish that, and then the parking pads where there are no garages are accomplishing that. So, yes, I think this roadway, the type D that was mentioned, does not have parking lights. Probably is lacking in guest accommodations. Guests of all sorts. So the concept of a remote parking lot, I think, is a good idea. I looked at that triangular area myself, but I think it's, if the alley can be widened in such a way to provide on-street parking behind the units, then I think that particular location is too remote for the southern homes that are along Millbrook that rely on on-street parking. And I think that's where probably Jeff's parking location tries to accomplish that goal of being closer to those units. I don't know the topography. I had not looked at that. I did not realize that it was HOA property. And I commiserate with folks who don't want a parking lot in their backyard. I think if it were to occur, it would have to be done very well and buffered very well. It would have to be lit. It would have to be safe. It would have to have sidewalks. But it's a viable alternative.
And what is your thought about how to accomplish that through the HOA, through a joint venture? What's your thought?
What I heard, part of what I'm thinking is if, in fact, the alley solution and the parking lot solution were engaged, that I heard $300,000 was going to be expended on the roadway. I think $300,000 would go good way towards accomplishing these infrastructure improvements.
Rather than setting it back.
Rather than making the voted request, right? The other aspect of that is that it does preserve those street trees that I heard a lot of people get concerned about. And it would make Millbrook a no parking zone. I think Jeff had a pretty good idea that, okay, 15 minutes. I mean, Chief's not here, but I don't think he's going to be cruising out with his stopwatch, seeing if you're there. So, I think that's a pretty good solution.
I think if there's no parking on that stretch of Millbrook, you wouldn't need to widen or take the trees down. I think it would be fine to widen not have the cars there.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah, I'm just confirming what you're saying.
I mean, we put up no parking signs or 15-minute parking signs.
So maybe put the developers, the money that would have spent widening the road, maybe it could help create alternative parking.
But Joe Faulkner, I thought I remembered you saying that those trees were already destined to go down.
Not the street trees. I was talking about the trees on outside the sidewalk, back of the sidewalk.
On the
So,
apartment side.
that's correct, on the apartment side, that's
The trees
correct.
are just
But-
15,000, they're beautiful, they're covering the streets, it would be a shame to take them down.
So, Madam Mayor, to your question, I think that my clients would certainly be willing to continue to engage with the town about what the proper solutions are here. I don't think any of these things are conditions of approval of the site plan. So I would request that you all go ahead and act on the site plan. But I'm certain that my clients, again, would be happy to engage in a discussion about alternatives to address these traffic and parking issues.
That's about it. More further questions? Thoughts about motions? Or additional questions?
Well, yeah, I'll speak up. I think I'm hearing an emerging consensus on this board that we are taking very seriously our obligation for public safety and health as regards to an evacuation route through the back. I view that as a condition for my vote. And I think that I've heard an offer for a condition for the site plan, $300,000 worth of improvements along Millbrook. And I very much appreciate that this is a touchy situation, trying to negotiate things in the public eye. But I would like to assure voters that we're engaged in a clear path to solutions. In addition to assurance that we're going to continue the conversation. I don't know if we can do that unilaterally. We just say we're going to take responsibility for it. But I'm feeling a little uncomfortable about approving this merely with the assurance that we'll have further conversations.
Commissioner, I would say that, of course, you're an elected official and you decide how to cast your vote. I would say, however, that this is not a matter that's within the discretion of the board. This is an administrative or ministerial review by this board, and if this application satisfies the town's requirements and the requirements of the master plan for Powell Place, it is required to be approved by this town. It has been under review. The site plan application has been under formal review by the town for more than 6 months, since February. It's been under discussion with the staff since before that. The staff did 3 very thorough rounds of review and comments and requests for changes. They worked with the applicants' engineers and the applicants who responded to all of those requests and satisfied them. Your Your staff recommended approval, your planning board unanimously recommended approval. What I'm telling you is there is a substantial commitment of resources that this developer has made to help address these problems that are not a condition of this site plan review. And it would be foolish of them not to continue. If you all decide that you'd rather have some other solution and redirect those resources to some other solution, why does it make any difference to them? But it is not an appropriate condition of the approval of this site plan. You know, folks have advised you all from time to time what your responsibility is. What I think your responsibility is reflected in your oath of office, is to support and maintain the laws of the United States and North Carolina. And what those laws require is that this site plan be approved because it meets all of your standards and requirements. And you have an opportunity. You have a developer who's at the outset of this project who is willing and motivated to continue to work with you. If you don't like the solution they proposed, it'd be foolish of them not to work with you on some alternative, if that's what you prefer and the community prefers. But it's not appropriate to impose conditions on this site plan approval when you don't have the jurisdiction to do that.
Maybe I feel like the emergency exit is not about the apartments, that's about existing Millbrook. To me, the issue is that, to me, that's a town responsibility. It has nothing to do with the apartments. It's something we would need to do whether the apartments were there or not. I do feel like if we're going to start construction on apartments, we need to make sure that the Millbrook Road is clear. And so the question is, how's that going to work? It's going to take some time to get the parking lots ready. So that's the question I have going forward, is how does maybe staff and developers have a sense of that, how we can make that work, because we can't say no parking on Powell Place until we have alternatives in place.
Well, I think the way the site plan is established now, that the road improvements that are shown on the site plan would need to be complete before the apartments could be occupied. So I think whether you're widening the road and or doing the alley widening and possibly the satellite parking lot could all be done well within the time frame that the apartments are under construction. And they could be a requirement to be complete prior to occupancy as well. Last time I expressed my thoughts on the matter that the developer was going to extraordinary measures to try to accommodate an issue. And so I appreciate that. And I think Millbrook, in many communities, it's a 27-foot wide road that's actually a pretty wide road for residential neighborhood. They're usually 24 feet. So it's got extra width. It can, I think, accommodate safely on-street parking and two-way traffic, but you got to be slow. You've got to give way to your neighbors, and you've got to be courteous. I do agree that the curb is probably the most problematic area, because when cars are parked there, you don't have a clear sight distance to oncoming traffic. So that is a pain point. So I can appreciate what the developer is trying to do to accommodate the situation. And for that reason, I made a motion to approve last time, because I thought it was the better solution available on the table. Since then, I have thought about, and I went and looked at the alley, and I found this language in MUPD that it would allow you to be compliant with the MUPD and put parking along there. And I think it'd be better to have parking in back than on the street. I heard a lot of folks say don't want parking on the street. I heard a lot of people who say they do want parking on the street. I think ultimately what they want is parking. They want to have parking for guests. They want to have parking for contractors. They want to have that parking proximate to their homes. So whether you do it in the alley or you do it in the road, I'd like to continue the conversation about seeing about the feasibility of the alley. I'd like to continue the conversation about the feasibility of the satellite parking lot. I am prepared to approve the project tonight with that understanding that we're going to look for alternate solutions in good faith. And do think that it is a creative solution to have an emergency access out the rear, out the west. I will make a comment on the alignment of Millbrook Drive and how it is making this interconnectivity more difficult. I think that several years ago, when this project was approved, that roadway should have been split over so it would align with the roadway instead of having to do this hairpin curve. But again, we're looking for practical, reasonable solutions now to make the situation better. And so I think the emergency access to the west is a very good idea. It's a very good idea. Again, we're talking about in an emergency situation that it would be engaged.
So I think we would need to decide, it seems to me, whether or not to keep the road as it is without widening it, and thus keeping the trees, but allow no parking and doing satellite lots, or stick with what they have to offer, which is to widen the street, but allow street parking.
Well, Commissioner Fiocco, I appreciate your vision of there being a trade-off or swap there. That hadn't even occurred to me, but I think that collaborating with Mr. Jones's idea, perhaps in addition to that, perhaps we have parking on the back side, the alleyway as you call it. Perhaps we could also explore the triangular piece of land up there as well. And instead of widening the Millbrook section and removing those nice street trees, I was of the opinion the street trees would grow back. They're not all that old. Eventually there will be nice street trees there again anyway, but so I was okay with that. I am still concerned about safety along that whole stretch. And I think we need to try and think hard about safety along the entire stretch of Millbrook.
I do think if you didn't have parking, it's going to help a lot. I mean, it's either widening it or not allowing street parking.
It seems to me that this appears to be a point of negotiation for sure in reference to the parking situation as well as the emergency exit. I think both of those are feasible in reference to what Mr. Jones has indicated, as well as Commissioner Fiocco, as well as Commissioner Bonnet. All of those are extra parking that can definitely be hopefully put into play. And so basically, I think this is definitely feasible for us. And we as a town, we can speak with the developers as well as the homeowners association to try to see how we can remedy this particular situation.
Well, I'll express appreciation to Mr. Bradshaw for summarizing what we did a few minutes ago. I received one letter, I guess we all received one letter that mentioned a true civic dilemma. And while indeed our responsibility is to enforce the laws of the state and the nation, I think we also have a clear responsibility to be responsible for advancing public health, safety, and welfare. And so the dilemma is that we're bound to uphold our zoning ordinances, specifically the MUPD, dating way back to 2002. And also, on the other horn, the dilemma of the public safety and general welfare. So on one horn, we have the possibility of getting gored in a legal fight, which none of us want to engage. On the other hand, we have the possibility of angering the public who live in this neighborhood, or worse, potentially. I sympathize very much with the citizens and neighbors in this development. And I've read every email and listened very carefully to all the input we've received on these apartments. And change is often hard and it can be frightening, but in this case I think we have a situation that is frightening with good reason. I mean, the board majority agreed on July 23rd that there was a safety issue at stake. And limited access to roads in and out. There's also safety concerns with regard to the speed of traffic, the nature of the fact that parking on street does tend to slow and calm traffic. I'm intrigued and looking forward to reading the traffic calming study. I'm reassured, Mr. Bradshaw, your assurances that the applicant would be interested, clearly interested in continuing these conversations. And after much thought, I've decided that I will support this site plan approval tonight because I believe that developers and landowners have truly worked in earnest and made significant efforts to respond to these public concerns. I think we're on the way to mitigating or resolving some of these concerns. We've seen a willingness, flexibility, eagerness to engage these conversations. I deeply appreciate that. Willingness to widen the Millbrook along the frontage, flexibility on buffers for the residents of Evandale. I appreciate all of that. I appreciate the willingness to potentially create more parking off street. Just want to make sure that I've covered all the points that I've been ruminating on. I do think that this is another one of those very familiar feelings, a situation where we are now discovering, in a time of rapid growth, we're anticipating rapid growth, we're discovering these deficiencies in old policies. And they're coming back to bite us now that we're growing so fast. But that was 2002. I think we've learned a lot. I think we're continuing to learn. Before, I don't want to presume the discussion has reached an end, but I want to be very clear that in supporting this project, that casting my support for a team that has engaged willingly and eagerly, enthusiastically in these conversations, extraordinary conversations, willingness to communicate, to collaborate, and to find solutions, and I think that's what we need more of today.
Is there further discussion or a motion?
I just want to add to that. This is especially difficult for me because I live in this community and I see, the problems we have with traffic. I live right on Millbrook also. Again, the developers are in keeping with our ordinances and the requirements. We legally can't say no to that. Would I have chosen apartments with this density for our neighborhood? No. But it is within what is allowed in our development, in our community. I do feel fortunate that the developers are local, they live here. We see them on the streets, not only the developers themselves, but the folks who are building the apartments are people who live nearby. They're going to be running the apartments. We'll be seeing them on a regular basis. That does provide some comfort in their willingness to work and to continue to engage with the community. So I feel like the developers have met the requirements of the law.
for a motion?
What is the appropriate order or motion? Simply to approve the site plan?
Do we have a consistency statement, or is it just an outright approval?
I move that we approve the site plan approval with the site plan as proposed.
John Bonnet's moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Jay Farrell. The further discussion?
I would like to acknowledge that the offer from the applicant to look at alternatives. I will vote in the affirmative to approve as is, but I like the idea of looking at these alternate solutions that we talked about tonight, specifically parking on the alleys and satellite parking possibilities.
And keeping the trees.
That will, if without the road widening, you will keep the street trees. And I would like to suggest that these other alternatives are in lieu of widening the road.
Perhaps some of the expense that was going to go towards widening the road could be used to create parking lots. And also, I'd like to get input from the community about the preferences, especially the people who live in that stretch.
You're speaking as things go on this continued conversation that you would like to hear from them. Okay. Any other comments? I would like to say that, this past week we lost what a lot of people are saying was a really amazing person who showed in politics the kind of dedication that one can bring when truly engaging and truly being cognizant of what community means. And I am really proud tonight to be able to say that I think this board has done just exactly that in a John McCain sort of a way. We've been mavericks who've spoken out about things that we think needed to be done, but we've also come together in a really engaging and continuing conversational kind of way, and I'm very, very pleased.
I want to acknowledge the people of Powell Place too, because I'm so impressed with the way that people in the community have come together, not always agreeing, but having a dialogue and working together and coming to meetings, and it takes courage to stand up and speak at a meeting, and I admire the people who have done so and have shown that they care about this community, and I hope one of the positive things that's come out of all this is that it's brought the community together anyway. And anyway, I just want to acknowledge people of Powell Place who put the effort into this, and your efforts have brought about some changes that I think will be positive.
Absolutely. I think it's a real tribute to the Powell Place residents. I don't know that we've ever received this many communications, not just communications, but articulate communications that have moved us in this direction. So, are we ready to vote? So the motion was made by John Bonnet, seconded by Jay Farrell. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Motion carried. Interest in taking a break before we approach additional elements for corporate resolution.
Snag your seat back.
We need a motion to come back into general order. So moved. Emma Baldwin moved and Michael Fiocco seconded. That we should return to general order. We are on item number 3 of old business, engaging in the discussion of the additional element of stormwater. And we have Elizabeth Dixon. Thank you, guys.
I am here to share a little bit of an update of where things are with the Chatham Park additional element on stormwater. There's been some interest and some questions about what's been going on since it was last before you. It was last year in February, which was before my time, but I understand it was February 12th when you saw it last. And at that time, it was determined that there was some additional review that needed to happen on what was presented. And the Hydrostructures was hired to help the town with that review. And I want to thank Hydrostructures. They are here and available if we've got questions for them. They have been very involved in this process since then, helping with the review and helping me understand the comments that have been in place and helping us work with Chatham Park to address the concerns that have been identified. A lot of the purpose of that review was to help the town identify that if the element met the town's current requirements and the state requirements that we are mandated to keep to meet with these kind of things. There were some major areas of concern that were in those comments. I know you all have seen the full list of comments, and as well as Chatham Park's responses, but a lot of those, if you group them, were really in a couple of categories, and these don't cover every single item, but cover the bulk of the items. Many of them were related to administrative items, things of how we'll track things, process related, how to make sure that we have adequate information for review, and keeping track ongoing of things related to the stormwater component of this project. A portion of the comments were related to effects on downstream or adjacent properties, things outside the limits of Chatham Park. A good number of items were related to the design manual, which is the tool we've got with the details about how to implement these standards. And then additional section of comments were how things were in conformance with other regulations. One of the main items that came out of this that I wanted to at least speak to, there's very little that I probably will share at this point because it's an active discussion that's going on between the town and the state, is some items of concern that came out of the stormwater review related to compliance with the town's environmental impact statement. EIS is what we many times refer to it as. This is a document that is used when we requested a permit, the MPDS permit, to discharge our sewer. There are items in that that are related to stormwater requirements, and those items have been identified as some areas of concern. At this time, that conversation is being held between the state and the town staff and the town attorney, and we'll continue to keep you updated, but for the purpose of this discussion tonight, that is something that we know needs to be addressed, and whenever that is resolved, this element, as well as some other town ordinances and processes, may need to be updated as well, and will have to come into conformance with anything that is mandated by that document. Most of the other comments that were outlined from Hydrostructures had either been addressed, a lot of them were identified with clarification. We were able to work through those, of just helping point out what items meant and where they were covered, or how other town documents would govern in those situations. There are still a small number of items that we're working through, and we have a list of what those are and are ticking them off as we can. We're working closely with Chatham Park on getting additional documents that will help with that. One of those being the design manual. A lot of those details are still being finalized in that. I did want to point out that kind of the main outcome of a lot of this has been that there was some clarification of the intent, that there is a state manual that outlines many of the stormwater devices, stormwater control measures, sometimes we call them BMPs, depending on the day, will depend on whether or not I reference in which direction. Those devices, the state has a manual and identifies criteria for design and building of those. The intent of Chatham Park is to use that when it's applicable, when those devices are being used, and only to use custom criteria for devices, calculations and things like that, when it's a unique item. So for the majority of the things that will ever be done here, the stormwater manual that we're accustomed to seeing in the engineering practices is still being used as a big tool in this area. There are very specific instances when it will be deviated from. There's also some DOT and town standards for certain SCMs from time to time, and those would be used when we're dealing with things that are appropriate for those categories. So that was something that was a big item, and I believe Hydrostructure will speak to the fact that once we got that clarification, there was a large list of items that started to become less concerning once we knew that item.
I'm sorry,
Sure.
Could you please step back about 2 paragraphs and just repeat, because I want to understand what clarification was again?
There is a stormwater BMP manual, is what it's referenced as most of the time. And there was a thought that the design manual was completely reestablishing criteria for almost all of the BMPs. The clarification that was found was it is only outlining criteria for times when the device is not outlined in the state's BMP manual. So there was some clarification of the fact we're going to be using it most of the time.
Using the state manual
the state
most
manual,
of the time. And so in exceptional cases where the state manual won't meet their needs, they will use their own design manual.
That is correct.
How will that be determined?
That may be something that's better for Hunter to share a little bit more information on. We can have him kind of explain that if the device is in the BMP manual, it will use the BMP manual, the state's BMP manual. That there are some innovative stormwater control measures that have not made it into the state's manual yet, and that would be something that we would work together and work through the state's process to make sure that they're in agreement as well if there's ever a new item that comes up. That speak to what your question is?
I'm both reassured and also a little bit concerned, but I'll hold that question for Hunter.
Okay.
But these measures will exceed the state manual, correct?
That may be, we'll let Hunter speak to that item. And I guess the other item was just verifying the process of looking at all the other regulations. There are quite a few items to have to weigh the differing requirements with components of this document. There actually is a pretty involved matrix that Hydrostructures help provide that walks through all of those things of what meets or exceeds other requirements that we're mandated to keep to. And so we're working through making sure there were a few clarifications on that spreadsheet to make sure that we addressed every single item, but that they did help quite a bit with that. I will allow Hunter to come up and answer questions or things like that. This is intended to be an overview and to kind of introduce this so that we can begin talking about it again. There are still drafts being circulated between us, both the element wrapping up some comments that we have had on the last round of stuff, and so that's still being finalized, and the design manual getting some addressing comments on that. And then Hydrostructures is here if there's specific questions for them, although we did meet this afternoon and kind of summarize our joint comments together. So I'll let Hunter speak and then I can pop back up here.
Good evening. Good to be back. So it sounds like 2 questions that are on the table right now that I want to speak to and happy to answer anything else that comes up as well. The first one being about the design manual reference. So this does not change our commitment to the performance standards that do go above and beyond state regulations. So those are water quality, peak flow, nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, mainly. Those are the in the master plan and they're restated in the element. The design manual covers the specifications for how to construct, how to design and construct any individual stormwater control measures. So in that respect, we will meet those. We don't intend, I don't know how we would exceed those. But the performance of the device itself is intended to exceed the minimum performance requirements, capabilities that are in the manual, if that makes sense. So from a big picture perspective, end of the pipe, what you see, or what the water quality is, that is intended to be higher than the state minimum. But the specifications for how to build a bioretention cell or a well are identical to the state's criteria, if that makes sense. So, does that address both questions? I'm happy to answer follow-ups or try to clarify that in any way I can.
In what circumstances?
Yes, that was the second question. So that would, the one that's on the ground now is the tree wells in the roadway. Those had not been officially adopted as a standard practice by the state. With the previous town engineer, we proposed that solution. We did vet it through the state, get their thoughts on it, and had back and forth on what design standards would govern their design and installation and performance. And that's a process that the state outlines and delegates authority to the local town to say, on a case-by-case basis, towns may deviate from our standards. And the hope of that is that we move the industry forward and get innovative projects on the ground so that we can evaluate their performance without trying to just make it a laboratory test that would take time and be that. So I don't have a criteria for how often that will happen, or in what specific circumstance that would be allowed or not allowed. But I concur with Elizabeth's assessment that the overwhelming majority of our devices that are seen on the ground will meet will be designed in accordance with either the state manual or the NCDOT manual. And DOT does have an initial toolbox for roadway installations. So we intend to design it per those, and unless there's an opportunity and a situation where small deviations from that would be warranted, and we would work with the town and the developers and the business owners to do that. And most of that is location and place of where these devices fit in, so that they're not behind a fence. And the traditional way of developing that during the master planning process was made. We understand the importance of designing this community as a livable, high quality of life community, and that does take some adaptation of the standards sometimes.
How long did it take to go through the state process on the tree wells?
We had done them in Greensboro previous, so there were examples on the ground that we had direct experience with. I would say it's 2 to 3 months of that design review. And most of that was, there was some discussion about the construction and maintenance of them, but the majority was how much credit is given to them. It's really about the crediting.
Are there further questions from the attorney?
Yeah, I have one. Under the environmental impact statement, it says the town is actively working with the state to address the concerns raised. What concerns are raised with the state?
I'll leave that one to the town.
Mr. Farrell, I can talk to you about that later, if you can wait.
Somebody else might want to know that. Well, oh, okay, thanks, sir. In the morning, maybe. All right, thank you.
In other words, that conversation is already on the agenda for closed session?
I'll just quickly add for scheduling, we're scheduling a meeting with Elizabeth for later this week to go through the general draft language and all that. And our plan has been to try to review these with staff so that it's not a completely cold submittal that doesn't, is analyzed by staff in a vacuum. So we worked collaboratively to get to that point. We intend to have a draft in front of you for the next meeting. That's our intent right now. We hope we can work through the remaining issues to get there.
team and make sure that we have got a final document that we can bring before. This addresses the comments that were identified in the memo from hydrostructures and staff's continued discussions with them. We continue to work with hydrostructures in this process, and they've been a tremendous resource for technical advice on this to help us get into the detail of this and to look at it with a different set of eyes on this particular item. And so we will bring it back as soon as it is completed in a final state. If it is next meeting, then that will be wonderful. It may be that it's in the next 1 to 2 meetings is what we're shooting for. If there's anything else at this time or other items we need to address.
I don't care to get into the weeds. I appreciate your summary, Elizabeth, and yeah, I look forward to hearing more about how staff, you and staff, are working through with Hunter and the Child Park team.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to hear from hydrostructures, and yet I don't quite know what I want to ask them. So could we?
But they are here and available. We had met ahead of time so that we were kind of prepared, but I will let them speak and share their perspective and answer questions that you may have.
Okay.
Yeah, we spent some time with Elizabeth this afternoon to try to summarize a lot of work.
Yeah, Brandon Sykes, hydrostructures.
Brandon Sykes? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, first of all, can you just sort of summarize the kinds of concerns that you had when you sat down originally to review this project, and whether they've been worked out or not?
So basically, we just wanted to, review it fresh eyes from scratch. So one thing I did, and I don't know if you've seen it, we put together a compliance matrix and a spreadsheet. So we had things like North Carolina watershed water supply rules, Town of Pittsboro zoning, Town of Pittsboro stormwater element, the state minimum design criteria for stormwater controls. What else did we have? The PDD, the open space element, because buffers are talked about in the PDD and the open space.
And did they jive? Did they match yours? Did they match,
Yeah. So ultimately, we were looking for compliance with all the local and state regulations. So in previous documents that Chatham Parks prepared and that the board has approved. So basically, my spreadsheet now, across the top, color green signifies compliance, and most of my top row is green. With the exception of the EIS, we just don't know the interpretation of the stormwater controls vaguely listed in the EIS. How, what do they mean? What's storm event? Is it volume match? Is it flow attenuation? Is it 25-year storm, a 10-year storm, a 1-year storm? Just, I think there's two statements in there that are kind of poorly written and vague and need to be defined.
somehow all that clarification needed to come together for us to just say, yes, so here, this is what's missing.
So I do think we were really close. Jeff and Elizabeth and Hunter and Ken and us,
Hammered out a lot of the hard stuff, I think, so far, except for that separate piece.
So you're one big happy family now.
Well, one more out family.
And our main intent of our review was to make sure the town's protected. We're reviewing it on behalf of the town of Pittsburgh.
Right.
We want y'all to get just as much as you can and make sure you're in compliance and you're not liable for any kind of shortcomings if there were or are.
And I think there were a lot of things that were a little unexpected to us, that the state is going to allow them to handle this project differently than would traditionally have been handled for a stormwater project. Normally, Jeff gets a set of plans and the stormwater rules apply to the property boundary. And that's not going to happen with them. It's going to be the entire 8,000 acres. And how do you track it? How do you handle it? What are you going to ask from them so that this is both streamlined for them, but keeps the town in compliance with what the state needs to see? There was a lot of new little nuances as opposed
Yes.
to that survey, and we really wanted to say, hey, let's not burden anybody, but let's make this trackable, right? There's a lot of administrative things that I think from the town's point of view is like, oh, we've never done it this way. Not that we can't, we just, let's look at that
Yeah, I mean,
so we don't burden ourselves with it.
Most developments are an acre to 300 acres, not 8,000 acres, but they just have the ability to amass the land and do it as one giant development.
One
So
giant project.
it's just a little different. And as engineers, as we see, usually see a site plan for a Lowe's or a grocery store, and everything's just applied to the site. It's cut and dry and done. And it's just a little different. Stand in line with it.
It's just the lot's a little larger, that's all, right? Well, one of the things that we've come to understand is that this formula, which is just way above my head, we're having, it's a totally untested formula that Mr. Freeman is leading us into, and that he's going to oversee and supervise. Is that as complicated to you all as it seemed to me?
Yeah, Hunter was nice enough to walk us through that complete explanation of the point system. And we also got to go see a presentation he did at NC State to explain it to the Raleigh stormwater engineers and several other people, biologists, lots of other people came. And I think a lot of the same questions that you all have, that you got from that same audience. I mean, it's never been done before. How are we keeping this up? If it doesn't matter who had put the list together for the point, everybody in that room would have had a different list. And so the list is based on how they came together with that and input from staff, and that was their priorities for it. And I think one of the nice points that Hunter has written into the element now is that either party is unhappy with the point system, then they can bring it before the board and get changes to it. And they've committed to do that because it's never been done before. You can't compare it to something else and say, oh, that'll work, but we don't like this. Okay, everybody's going to have a different opinion about that. And it was funny because even with all the lists of environmental concerns, he gives a presentation at State, and the guy from Raleigh said, well, my most important point isn't even on the list. And I'm like, what is it, right? Safety. Raleigh's been sued over people getting injured on some of these bigger stormwater structures. So
Falling NPMPs.
Falling NPMPs, that never hit my list.
So fences would get points.
I'm not proposing fences get points.
Yeah, so it's the point system can be modified.
Right. The element does do a good job of allowing everybody to open it back up and modify points and criteria because we don't know the points, how effective it's going to be or how great it's going to be, but we do have the ability to change it and try to do better.
But the rest of the design manual will follow the state's criteria, and I think that was one of the things that seemed to be initially questionable until everything got ironed out. And I would say that we are very close to that.
Very constructive comments and discussions.
And you're going to commit to build a fun area based on the subwatershed instead of the 8,000 acres left.
Tracking it.
That's a win.
Yeah.
So there's things in there that I think we've improved it over the last few months.
And I think the timing of Elizabeth coming in right now, which it couldn't have been any better. She's very well organized and has really started just pulling the pieces together.
Now, when we start monitoring these stormwater, will Hunter be sending this information to the town or to Elizabeth, or Elizabeth, you will be sending it?
Yes, the process, and it's outlined in, either the element or design manual or both, is that applicants within Chatham Park go through the design review committee, which includes myself, and then I prepare the summary documentation. So they would do the site level calculations, and and I just for lack of a better word, translate that to the larger sub-watershed or project level based on which variable we're talking about. And then I prepare a statement that Elizabeth that accompanies that statement.
Okay, thank you.
And that in itself, just tracking that information, if you think about him tracking the performance and maintenance of every single BMP in the 8,000 acres, right? And how the town can receive that without loading up paperwork.
As a package.
As a package, yeah.
And we can audit anything that we see that we need to look into closer and contact Hunter and have him chase it further if we need to. And that's built in there as well.
And a lot of the language I think we've really been teasing apart now is how do we do it if Hunter retires? You know, it's like making sure that's in place. Like,
You just can't
do
It's called insurance.
Yes. Yeah.
It's called what?
Insurance policy.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you guys because I was probably the reason that you guys came on board because I had no idea what stormwater was other than coming from the sky, and I like that. So I'm glad to see groups working together, and sure makes me feel a lot better that we're headed in this direction.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Any other questions for?
Any other questions for Elizabeth? Thank you. So, are we next on to public facilities, Jeff Jones?
Okay, thank you, Mayor, members of the board. So we'll have a discussion, continuation of our ongoing discussion of public facilities. I know that Chatham Park over the last couple of weeks have been working on amending this section and particularly trying to hone in on their responses to the parks and recreation. I think they gave a great overview of what they're proposing to do at the last meeting. Maybe what they're going to share with you tonight is how they're proposing to make all those things happen through the element, because that's still a little left outstanding. Typically, we have some language or something that's included in your packet. We didn't have anything at the packet submittal last week, but I do believe that Chatham Park has a number of topics or issues that they would like to discuss with you all and maybe get some sort of feedback on each individual topic as they go through. Staff is here, including Parks. Paul's here for Parks, and we can answer any questions that you might have. But I'll turn it over to Chatham Park to give us
Robbie's going to pass out a couple things you can refer to as I'm speaking. I'm not really going to go over what we went over last time, since you've already had that information for a few weeks, but there are a couple things that we've added since last time after hearing some comments from various members. And I'm going to start with Parks, but I'm sure that Mr. Farrell has a couple of questions about fire that I'll be able to speak to as well. So first of all, on the 8.5 by 11, these are the additions that we've made to what we're proposing. And I'll say this, because we haven't tried to, I mean, this is pretty close to language that would be in the element, but we have not rewritten the element. This is just to get concepts out there, and then you can ask questions about those. So what I'm going to do is summarize what we've got on that 8.5 by 11. So first of all, and we did talk about this last week, but it fits in with what we're, really the gist of what we're getting at. I'm going to talk about parks first. That we did add we would be spending $500,000 for each of 7 parks, one each in the different park service areas that are identified in the master plan. And those are the neighborhood type parks that are a minimum of 10 acres. So we'd be spending $3.5 million total, and I think there was language in there that if you chose, we could spend $1 million on one and hold another one till later, that sort of thing. So we have that kind of flexibility in there. Then secondly, this is a fairly significant addition that speaks to a couple of comments, but we have added 2 larger parks to the list, so it'll be a total of 9 parks now. 2 larger parks after the 7 not in addition to the 7 neighborhood parks. These are your community and district regional level parks that we would spend $3 million on each of those. The town would provide a matching $3 million so that each of those parks would get $6 million at least of money for the initial development if that doesn't take care of the complete development of those 2 parks. In addition to that thinking, then we put language in there that said we've also got the ability, should you not have, in the early years of this, should you not have that $3 million to match, we could go into that first one, spend $5 million, for example, or any combination of these things that gets to 6. $5 million, you wouldn't have to spend anything on that first one. But then in the future, you would spend $1 million on that. But the second park, you would have to spend $5 million. We would spend $1 million. So each party is spending $6 million total, and we could go heavy on that up front, since we're thinking the early years you might not have access to those monies. In the later years, they would be there. And then the timing of the second large park would occur at the 15,000th CO, just to give a certainty of when that second one would occur.
So on the second page?
It's on 2C. Got it? Okay. So that's basically what we are proposing for parks, beyond what we had talked about last meeting. So then the next category that we refer to here, I guess this portion of it is on page 2, but number 5, after listening to your presentation on your master plan about how the majority of the biking community prefers to have bike lanes adjacent to the road rather than in. It wasn't that we don't want to include bike lanes within the roads, but we defined, and you've got that first handout that shows the roads where we would include bike lanes. And what we tried to do in including those roads, and we bounce this off to Mr. Fiocco since he's one of those people that will be in the road for some reason instead of beside the road.
Hopefully the reason is I'm on my bicycle.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, hopefully. But that we wanted to ensure that there was some kind of connectivity with those bike lanes within the roads, in addition to then having the connectivity on the side paths. So what we did was say that we will include these 2 graphics in the element showing what would happen with the small area plans come in, and guaranteeing that those particular roads would have bike lanes within the right-of-way, and then showing the other roads that would have a minimum of those side paths. We've already, in a couple of roads you'll notice, we've already got both bike lanes and side paths or multi-use trails beside the roads because we hadn't come up with this sort of analysis of how this would work. So we, particularly in the neighborhoods you've already approved, you can see we've got both. And so so the element would have these graphics in there, and then the element would also say that since these alignments, particularly in the south, haven't had as much thinking behind them as in the north. That the small area, it would be, those final alignments would be memorialized in the small area plan for the South Village. And then, that's all on bike lanes. And then finally, really the substance, and that number 7, we are recommending, and we've been working towards this, obviously this is not a requirement, but we're recommending that we get to a point with that 250-acre park that we've shown in other documents that have already been approved, that we have a partnership between the town and the YMCA that would particularly locate resident camping facilities and day camping facilities that would be used by the public and as well as Y members. So that the detail of that would happen as we go on. There's nothing in here that requires you to do that. But from our experience, we've had a great relationship with the YMCA. They do great things. I think a number of you are already aware of many of the programs they already are providing in this community without really having a facility. So we're working towards trying to have 2 YMCA facilities, one YMCA community center, aquatic center kind of facility, and then secondly a camping facility further south. And I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, but the Chapelville YMCA has been working out of a camp called Camp Clearwater. It's behind Governor's Club. It's very inadequate just in terms of usability of the land and just the facility they're able to put there. And so this would be really a star in the YMCA crown if this happened here. And I think it would be something that would be great for this community. But we would talk more about that later. So that's the summary of those items, and I'll hold fire for a second until take any questions just on parks and bike lanes.
Chuck, I thought that what I heard you saying was that these illustrations would give us some understanding of where bike lanes would be on street and where they would be separate from the street.
The first one for the North Village gets into that one. There are 2 different colors represented.
Okay, so a bike lane is when it's on the pavement, cars,
right.
and a multi-use trail is when it's...
We would be taking, typically we'd be taking the sidewalk, a 5-foot sidewalk, and turning it into a 10-foot multi-use trail. And it would be along the right-of-way. Similar to what I think, I'm not quite sure exactly how you're doing this on your DOT project coming to town on 15501, but I think you're doing the same sort of thing with multi-use paths on the side as opposed to within the right-of-way.
Not necessarily something you take a child on for.
Multi-use paths.
Multi-use, yes.
But there's the main one that you're going to have more of those.
Yeah, I don't know if you had the opportunity to see the slides from the presentation your consultant did last meeting when you weren't here, but he gave a percentage of how many from his research, I guess, and I'm not speaking to the accuracy of any of that, but I think it was something like 70% of the biking community, people on bikes, prefer the side paths, and it was something like 30%, doing it by memory, so it may not be exactly right, preferred to be in the road. And obviously, that group you're talking about would be on the...
More of them would be on the road.
Right, and really would probably be more on the greenways as opposed to even adjacent to the right-of-way, but yes.
And there's a substantial population, especially in this area, who are going to be on the road. It's either for recreational purposes or it is for commuting. And so what I'm seeing is that it looks like the bike lanes would be on the higher speed roadways where those folks are going to be, so it makes sense to make room for them. And in the lower speed roadways, you can pretty well share the road with somebody going 30, 35 miles per hour. But 45 and above, we need some separation. And I think that's what this is doing.
It's trying to do that, but there's still some question mark. We didn't want to, I know you had brought that up about 45 miles an hour and that sort of thing, but we didn't want to restricted to that because some of these are still a little bit far out to know that they're going to be 45 or 35 or whatever. So we tried to define it this way right now.
Yeah, and from what I can see, I mean, it seems to make sense to me.
So the proposed multi-use trailer, that's not associated with the street at all. It's just through the development, is that right?
I'm going to give you a typical answer, so it's not an absolute.
Okay.
And we've included these already on subdivisions, the subdivision that's been approved. But for example, if we got two streams that are this far apart, we got Greenway, we would connect those adjacent to the road by taking a 5-foot sidewalk, adding another 5 feet to it, and turning it into a 10-foot multi-use trail that gives, then you've got a 10-foot greenway connecting to a 10-foot multi-use trail connecting to a 10-foot greenway. In addition to that, then, just again to supplement the biking connectivity, we would be looking at, like we've done on the road, I don't have road names yet, but as you go north towards Bynum, that is showing that as all along that road would be a 10-foot multi-use trail that would really be for the bikers on that road. Because right now we see that road being something similar to what you've approved that we're calling Vine. Is it Parkway? But anyway, it's a median divided 2-lane facility that would have the path beside it but not within it. As Mr. Fiocco says, that's a lower speed road. It's not projected to be a 45 mile an hour, so we're trying to get that to be a 35 mile an hour road.
And that's where you show the purple next to the blue.
Right. Right. Well, I think on the one up north it doesn't show blue because there wouldn't be bike lanes in the road. It just shows the purple or the redder color.
Kind of looks like a question mark.
Yeah. That's yes. The question would be a good name for it.
What street?
Question mark drive. Okay, so and we had proposed, I think we had talked about this last time too. We would rather, just because of how difficult it is to go through language, we wanted to get concepts to you, get you to give a nod on concepts so that we know we're good, and then we start, rather than write it and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it, we're going to write it one more time, if that makes sense.
I look forward to hearing staff's feedback on comments. On the concepts. And these drawings as well.
Okay, any other questions or comments on parks?
What's this? Is that a park?
It's a homeowner, it's a recreation facility, but it's one of our homeowner facilities.
This way.
So for Chatham Park residents, it would be yes.
Okay, what is it again? I'm sorry.
A homeowner's recreation facility.
Like a picnic shelter or
It would do that. Could have a pool. Could have, if you worked out a agreement with the state, it could have kayak entry or things like that. Be a little more high adventure related, just because of its location.
What is this map calling us?
The South Village, where we would be including bike lanes.
Okay.
For that connectivity for bike lanes within the road.
Got it.
Within the road. And we haven't gotten to the detail of including the multi-use trails until we get to the small area plan for that.
So that will just be defined in the small area plan for
just as you have that, just as you, and I would say too, that's a minimum, because as we really get into the details of neighborhood design, there's a couple that you would look at on the subdivision you've already approved. It's not on that drawing, but I don't think it's on that drawing, but Actually, it is. I don't think it's a small area plan level. If you look down in the, between 64 Business and Bypass, and there's a little purple multi-use trail going from Wendover, which is the east-west road, is on your thoroughfare plan, but that little narrow, that's showing a 10-foot multi-use trail in there, but just to add connectivity to off-site properties that we would not have shown on a small area plan. We just have that just because we've gone through the development grant plan process, we've been able to look at a little more granular. Any other questions? Okay, Jay, did you want to ask any, I think there's a meeting taking place Wednesday.
Yeah, I might need to double check that.
Some of those last details on fire, but we had already, just the essence of what you guys had done before, we're still there with adding the fourth fire station. The stipulation that the land goes to the town as opposed to the county or an entity that owns fire, whoever that is.
I think it was just a minor rewording that we needed to just double check and finalize it.
Right. And I didn't know if Mr. Messick and Darrell had gotten together yet, but the point is for them to look at that wording. And so that's been done. It's not that we were...
No, we have not done that. But hopefully do that next day or two.
Okay.
Conceptually, I like this.
Okay. So is that a nod to proceed with final wording?
It is, yeah.
I just have to say, I was impressed last meeting, Chuck, with the...
Oh, you mean we gave too much here?
No, okay, not. Yeah, very nice.
We'll continue to ask for more. I do like this, the bike trails that are off the road. There are some cities that have bike trails that go through you can go through the city without, you cross sort of major roads, but you can go all through the city without being afraid to be hit by a car. So I like this idea. I like that.
There are a few Supermen out there that don't worry about that, but a lot of people do. So
those are real amenities. Really well.
I think it's gonna be great.
The High Line in New York City, I'd love to have. Terrific experience.
Yeah, that was never envisioned to be that, obviously.
Clearly an exceptional situation we won't have, but we can do something analogous.
I think we're creating exceptional situations.
Yeah.
They've got this in Vancouver, that bike through Vancouver, and it goes inside like this.
Okay.
Good.
That's good.
About the last meeting, it was impressive, and I very much look forward to those numbers.
Yeah,
the electronic format.
I did respond to your email. What I wanted to get through tonight and add, to alter that so that it was more current with what we talked about tonight, rather than put it out there and it already be a little bit off. So we're working on that. But I promise you, I emailed Jeff and let him know he'd be getting that to put it online.
Okay. Well, I'm noting that I'm actually seeing staff vigorously reading through this 2 pages. So I believe that this is the first they've seen that.
Yes.
So I encourage you to hold off before you commit to formalizing language until we hear from staff about these concepts.
If they chose to give us some comments before 2 weeks from now.
Whatever the schedule.
Okay. Anything else?
Thank you, Chuck.
Okay, thank you.
So that brings us to the end of our regular agenda with additional updates with commissioners' concerns. So, shall we commit to do that? Jay Jones, you have commissioners' concerns?
No, ma'am. Not at this time.
Brad? Commissioners' concerns? Michael?
Very good. Oh, boy.
No. No, we... Yes,
Oh, my goodness. All right, I'm the bad guy. So, yeah, there's three things, and so I'm glad our friends at Chatham Park investors are still with us. But on public facilities, we've had a lot of conversations, been very fruitful. Schools, public safety, law enforcement, fire. I think we still need to think and discuss about those public works facilities that will be needed by the residents that we'll attract. Seems like the North Village is big enough that it probably ought to have its own depot. And so I very much appreciate if staff would work on those conversations, figure out what we need based on the projections, develop similar projections to what we have. I'll have that.
And I've played with that a little bit, and it's not even so much an issue with North Village, it's an issue with scale of the town in general. And so we've got some more information that I can present to that one.
Yeah. And I can imagine in the farther future something down to the south as well. I think it strikes me that those facilities ought to be somewhat geographically located to allow for, it's not like snow removal is as urgent as police and fire, but there's a desire from the public for responsiveness there, and a desire from me, maybe the rest of the board, to see a certain level of efficiency in not having very long haul lines for your leaf trucks. So I'm sure y'all can figure it out.
Yeah, it's it's surprising, and I would have thought that too. It's not as critical. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. It's not the response time issue isn't as critical for streets and utilities and public works as it is for, say, police and fire. And it's strange because a lot of the communities, or some of the communities that I've looked at and that I've worked in, it's almost surprising the relatively I don't want to say low amount, but not as much amount of thought has gone into locating the facilities in certain areas. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. So, but that one kind of surprised me a little bit. Yeah.
And I did have a conversation just last Thursday with an employee of the city of Raleigh. The conversation was prompted by the notion of the substantial and admirable efforts that Raleigh has made investing in facilities for their fleet management. We're not at that point yet, but they have a really impressive green building where they do all the maintenance on their trucks and vehicles and police cars. But she says she does indeed have a database from which she could very quickly draw some numbers suggesting how that community has dealt with this question in terms of acreage for public works, and maybe even square footage. So thank you. There was the July 30th meeting with DOT. I'd like to thank Mayor and Commissioner Fiocco and Mr. Grusbeck for participating and for so vigorously pursuing the town's needs and finding a way to move truck traffic out of downtown. Thank you. My understanding from that email, and Commissioner Foley, thank you for popping it up at the top of our inbox today, is that that discussion effectively removed Highway 87 widening from the usual prioritization and ranking, because Secretary Trogan pledged that this could be taken care of outside that process.
Discretionary funds.
Yes.
That was my understanding.
So I think there's a need to achieve some measure of documentation or record of that conversation. I'd very much like to see something, and I think it makes sense if indeed it is being removed from the normal scheduling and ranking process. Or maybe the question is, what are the scheduling details for that 87 project? That might prompt just that kind of documentation.
I remember that in October, there's going to be another meeting which is going to be somewhat determinative about the prioritization issues and the discretionary funds?
Well, no, it's not. There's, in the whole region, there's essentially 14 projects that will receive local points. And 87 project is not on there. The Chatham Parkway project has been redefined as the boundary of that project. We will need to have a project come off that list of 14, come off that list from another community for our project, Chatham Park, to score. So that's that aspect. I think what John is saying is we might just need to do something with the DOT to document commitments or overtures that were made, so we can figure out, okay, how do we use this discretionary funds?
How do we plan?
Right.
Well, I can tell you that after the meeting, about a week, afterwards, I reached out to Bobby Lewis, who is their CFO, and asked him to get back with me as the next steps. So, excellent.
Okay. That'd be great. Let's see, and then we also received, I believe all of us commissioners received an email today that I want to commend to your attention. It was a request for help and cooperation with just a very small number of drinking water samples from our finished drinking water from residences or businesses in town or in the ATJ. The request went out to county commissioners as well. The opportunity we have here is for Duke University to pay for an awful lot of testing for some contaminants that really are of concern. If you've heard of this Gen X stuff down near Fayetteville and farther down towards Wilmington, that is one of the kinds of chemicals in this family that they're going to be testing for. And I spoke with Emily Sutton today, and again, I just urge folks to pay attention to that email. If you know people who are interested or concerned about their water quality or concerned or just interested in science, participating in science, it's not hard. It's going to be a one-time visit to a house or place of business. Samples are pulled from the faucet or the filtration device, a Brita filter or whatever you use for filtering your water. It does need to be sampled by this aspiring scientist. So she needs to pull the sample according to their requirements. And I believe that participants will receive data back. The thing about this is it's no reflection on the quality or excellence of our service, but it's a level of examination that goes above and beyond the state's requirements and even federal requirements, I gather, because indeed this student from Duke University is trying to learn. But it's a set of contaminants that we all ought to be concerned about. I'm also wondering if maybe we might provide some guidance to this scientist. Emily indicated there might be some possibility of piggybacking on this to the extent that we might still in town have some very old pipes. If any of those pipes are of questionable quality or integrity, that it might be helpful if she could piggyback and look for anything else that might be of concern. Mr. Griesbeck, is that something that you'd be willing to
If you have
share
Ms.
feedback?
Sutton's contact information, then we can follow up with her.
I think the email came to you as well, but I don't know.
I didn't get the email.
Thank you. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And our meeting is only on Wednesday or Thursday, so I'll try to follow up on that too. That's the end of our agenda, but we have scheduled a closed session. Is there a motion that we go into closed session?
Second?
by James Carroll, seconded by
It's done, one box of
Not yet.
Actually,